Hello.
Hi, how are you, Lynn? Can you hear me okay, Lynn?
Sorry.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sorry, my earphones ran away on me.
No worries, that happens. Hi, everyone.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
You,
Hey, Chi. How are you?
super sparkly. And Andrew, how are you tonight?
Good.
Good. Carmen, how are you tonight?
Good, you?
Are you flying tonight?
No, Thursday.
Thursday, okay. Never mind.
Yeah.
Eric, how are you tonight?
Good. How about you?
Thanks. Luis, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Excellent, thank you. I like that you wear your loyal Tigers fan hat to class. That's worth a screenshot if I knew what that was and how to do it, so thank you for that. Paige, I'm not seeing your video yet. I hope you're there.
I'm here. I'm working on it.
Okay. Hey, Rasha, how are you tonight?
Good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Wu, how are you tonight?
Good. How about you?
I'm excellent, thank you. So, I'm not sure if we have everyone. No. So do we have Carmen here?
Yes,
we
I'm
have
here.
Carmen. Thank you. We're missing Michael. We're missing Ash. Do we have Nancy? I'm sorry. I think we're missing Nancy and Josh. No, Josh is here. Josh is just joining us. Hi,
Hello.
Josh. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good. I usually am the one that sends out the invite, so you all don't have to do it. And by controlling that invitation, everyone, that allows me to close the session and then release to you the next day the YouTube of the class, should you ever be so bored as to want to revisit the session for whatever reason. Okay. So let's get started. I recognize that not everyone's here, and I'm not intending to be unfair to them by not waiting to do tonight, and I want to get into it. And of course, as I said, we record these lectures, these conversations, so that if you're 2 or 3 minutes late, you can come back in and catch up on that. The first thing I want to do is mention that these synchronous sessions, even as we get deeper into the semester, will start on Tuesday nights at 5:30, usually pretty promptly, because I go into work early so that I can leave work early to be here with you. So I usually, unless there's some unforeseen nuclear attack at the office, which has happened, I will be here at 5:30. It's taking me, for some reason, a little longer to add everybody to the invite list. I have to figure out a way to cluster you all together and copy paste it, but I haven't figured that out yet. But in any event, it's taking me like 10 minutes to do this, which is why this started a couple moments late. But it's in these early conversations, as we get deeper into the semester, where some of the sort of dates and expectations might be articulated. So it's important for you, to the extent that you can be here on time, to do just that. The second thing is, I want to pause for a minute and let you all sort of ask questions that, after maybe pouring through some of the material, maybe you've read the David Maraniss book, or maybe you've been doing some research and looking in areas that you've been sort of dedicated to studying for this first research push. I'm wondering if you have any questions in general, or if you have any questions about all of the material that we covered last week. So I'm listening. Hearing none. Is that a good sign? Must be. Excellent. Tonight, I want to spoon feed something to you. There is some risk at doing that. It has to do with my resistance to give you content in a sort of direct, top-down way. Reluctant to share with you what is ostensibly a speech by a mayor that, you know, is in the campaign season. But you know, every year I go to the Michigan Policy Conference that is hosted up on Mackinac Island by the Chamber of Commerce. And it's 3 days of elbow rubbing and conversations about all things Detroit. And it has grown to be very, very interesting with the keynote speeches by our governor, Rick Snyder, and by our senators and congressmen who are also usually in attendance. Even John Dingell, incapacitated to some extent, is there. His wife, Debbie Dingell, is there. But for me, because I work at Hamilton Anderson, because so much of what we're doing is impacted by the city government, the remarks that Mayor Mike Duggan usually makes have been pretty compelling to me and pretty interesting. As an aside, and this is kind of full transparency, I'm opening my kimono here so that you understand why you're going to look at what you're about to see. We actually had the Honorable Mike Duggan in our office today as part of a fundraiser that had organized. And so he gave kind of a pep talk. And I got to thinking, watching him talk about all that he's doing that aligned with his campaign speech, that he actually had a pretty amazing keynote speech at the 2017 Mackinac Policy Conference. And so I want you to watch it, and I want you to look at it all the way through. But I also want to, and here's that spoon feed top down thing, I want to spend 30 minutes with you, letting you watch it together. And so I'm going to screen share that because in some ways it talks about the many things that all of you must need, you may need to be cognizant of, that you may need to understand the sort of context of as we operate as architects and designers in historic Brush Park. He doesn't necessarily talk about Brush Park per se. We're going to talk about that in a few moments, but I want to spend the first 30 minutes, so please forgive me for giving you sort of a history lesson by letting you listen to, once again, a campaign talk, but I want to give you the history lesson as told by Mayor Mike Duggan. I'm going to screen share that right now. If you are, for some reason I'm not able to, here we go. If listening to the mayor is repulsive to you, which I can appreciate, then maybe go get a cup of tea and come back in 28 or 29 minutes. I'm going to, but you do need to watch it at some point. I just don't want to watch you vomit if that's the case. But I think you'll find it very interesting. He covers a large arc of Detroit's history, and I think you're going to agree that it's important. Now, there's a couple. I can do this as a screen share, but you can also type in Mayor Duggan, D-U-G-G-A-N, keynote address, 2017 Mackinac Policy Conference. I hope that the volume is acceptable to you here. If it's wonky or if it spits up, you can mute our conversation here and watch it on your own. So I'm going to fire that up now. Here we go.
many people were at my speech last year? Most of you. All right, well, that's good because this one will be different. And we are evolving as an administration from the first few years, which was get the street lights on, get the grass cut in the parks, get the police to show up, get the buses to run, to now, what kind of a city do we want to be? And is there a vision? And so our progress has been well documented. And you might see all these projects and things. Are these a bunch of individual transactions, or is there a coherent vision that's driving this? And I want to talk to you today about that vision. But in order to do that, we've got to go back into our history because the way Detroit looks today is directly rooted in planning decisions that the leaders of this community made in the 1940s and the 1950s. That was the last period of growth in Detroit. And those decisions reverberate today. And as I'm going to show you, unfortunately, many of those decisions were rooted in racial discrimination. And when you see the facts, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So as we try to decide what we're doing today, we're in the first period of growth in 50 or 60 years. People moving back. We have a chance to plan growth for the first time in half a century. And so every day we get up and say, what's the vision that's going to drive us? And we have one single guiding principle for those of you who live or work in the city, those of you who are thinking about living or working in the city, what the future looks like. And our principle is this: it's one city for all of us. That defines our planning strategy. And so we're pursuing an urban redevelopment strategy that hasn't been tried before in the country. And I'm going to show you why we're doing it. But first, we have to go back in time, because urban redevelopment in America has historically across the country been about removing the poor. It was conceived as slum clearance. And this picture happens to be from Boston, but it was all across America. It was poor people getting moved out. And in Detroit, you have to go back to what happened before World War II. We were the arsenal of democracy. We like to brag about that. But in the late 1930s, while the country was in a depression, Detroit started to ramp up when Roosevelt did the Lend-Lease for Europe, even before we got into World War II. And people started moving here from the South in even bigger numbers. In 1940, the president of General Motors, William Knudsen, left the company for a greater calling. He became the head of America's wartime effort, right out of Detroit. 200,000 Southerners migrated to Detroit for World War II war production. A lot of African Americans from the South, a whole lot of Caucasians from Kentucky and Tennessee, white and black, came and moved into the city at the same time. And you had at one point 700,000 people working in the plants here. And so, you know what happened? They rapidly expanded the Packard plant, added plant after plant. The engines in the PT boats, the engines in the B-29 bombers were made in Detroit at the Packard plant. It was rapidly expanded for purposes of the war. Housing had to get built quickly. And from 1925 to 1945, 200,000 homes were built in Detroit. They built them all the way to the city border, single-family homes. Couldn't put them up fast enough. No thought to long-term planning. We were trying to win a war, and we were trying to create housing. And so this is an interesting picture that was put out at the time from a group that was trying to deal with the housing problems in Detroit. And each family here represents 10,000 people. And what this shows is between 30 and 40, more people were pouring into Detroit than the expansion of the houses. But once the war effort started as a whole, from 40 to 42, you had 3 times as many people moving in as the housing. But of course, it wasn't equal. The Caucasians coming from the South could live anywhere in the city. But the African Americans were confined to these neighborhoods. And as people poured in, the crowding became enormous in the African American communities. They were going to work every day in the same plant, but living in very different neighborhoods. And in June of 43, people forget this. People over the housing issue in the middle of World War II, 34 people killed, 433 injured. This happened then when the country should have been pulling together. And so you say, well, how did that happen? what's the problem? And this is the thing that makes you so angry. Much of the problem we had was the direct result of the federal government. Franklin Roosevelt created the Federal Housing Administration because you couldn't get mortgages to buy a house. And so we're going to create an entity that's going to guarantee mortgages for lower income or middle income people. So the FHA structure. They guarantee the mortgages for the banks so they could increase home ownership. But from the beginning to this, principles that said mortgages are moving away from minority neighborhoods, 1934. And so the term redlining, who here knows where redlining comes from? Right, you hear it all the time, I'm going to show you. It comes from the FHA. These were the FHA mortgage guidelines. You had green zones. A green zone was a new homogeneous area with American business and professional men. That was best risk. Then you had blue zones. They're still desirable. You had yellow zones that were declining, typically bordering on mixed neighborhoods. And you had red zones that were declining and by and large had minority population. And so the term redlining, this is a map from the federal government of the city of Detroit in 1939. And in the red areas, if you made a mortgage, the federal government would not guarantee it. And so you want to say today, how did all these areas deteriorate? How did this housing go? The truth of the matter is, the roots of the deteriorating housing was here. You could not get a loan to fix up your home in those red areas in the 1930s. And it wasn't like this map was a fluke. These are the underwriting manuals, the actual manual the FHA put out to every bank and mortgage company in America, 1946. Here's your guidance. Incompatible racial groups should not be permitted to live in the same communities. Properties shall continue to be occupied by the same social and racial classes. They wouldn't fund integration. And appraisers, in assessing appraisal, are instructed to predict the probability of the location being invaded by incompatible racial and social groups. So if you were adjacent to a minority area, your appraisal got downgraded. And so, of course, how did it match up? Not surprising, where the African-American population was concentrated was redlining. And one of the most extreme cases up there in 8 Mile, Wyoming, because by the 1940s, they were out to 8 Mile, the last of the farmland in the city of Detroit. And you had a developer who said, there's a mixed neighborhood, a racially mixed neighborhood that built out here, was a pride of a number of the African-American communities. And a developer wanted to build right next door. And they went to the federal government. And the FHA said, we won't make the loan because you're adjacent to a mixed neighborhood. There is no racial homogeneity. Development was dead. Said, I'll build a wall. Okay? And they said, here's what we'll do. Here's the existing African-American neighborhood. We'll build this wall. And the wall doesn't have to be so high it has barbed wire, but we won't make loans to black people on this side of the wall. And the FHA said, great. And they approved the project. And they built the wall. This is 8 Mile and Burwood. They built this wall where the black families lived here, built a new subdivision there. You can see the children in the old neighborhood up against the wall. This is what our federal government did. That wall still exists today. You can go see it. It's half a mile wide. Now, the children of Detroit have since painted it with images of civil rights, but that wall still exists in the city of Detroit today. These experiences are very much in the conscience of Detroiters, passed down from generation to generation. In many cases, we have folks who still remember them. And so in 1945, you had a free press operator, a fellow by the name of Orsil McGee, and he wanted to buy a house over here, outside of the boundaries. And most of these neighborhoods were protected by deeds with restrictive covenants. Said an African-American cannot buy in this neighborhood. He sued. Thurgood Marshall took the case to the U.S. Supreme Court. In a companion case that the lawyers will remember. And in 1948, the U.S. Supreme Court restrictive covenants in this country. That sits in front of the McGee's house. That's the McGee family there. For African Americans to move into these neighborhoods, they had to go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. This is what's in our city's history. And so as soon as World War II ended, it seems like, right, the new generation of plants were all built on one level. The old plants were built on 5 or 6 levels. The car would go down the assembly line to the 6th floor, come down a freight elevator to the 5th floor. But the next generation, they wanted to spread out all on one floor. Well, of course, the planners in Detroit, in their haste to build the houses, hadn't left any room for that. And so the old plants closed one at a time. The plant that built those PT boats and B-29s was forgotten. No effort made to save the old plants. New shopping mall, that was Northland. People wanted to be in an area with all this parking. There's no room left in Detroit. That's okay. We'll go out to the suburbs. And the US government accelerated this. I mean, nearly half of all suburban homes in the 50s and 60s had FHA guaranteed mortgages. The suburbs were built with federal government guarantee. And here's the interesting thing, is that the National Commission on Fair Housing saw 98% of all of the FHA-backed mortgages went to Caucasian homebuyers. Through 19... How did all those homes in Detroit deteriorate over the years? There was a conscious federal policy that discarded what was left behind and subsidized the suburbs. And so as the black population grew, even once you won the case in Shelley versus Kramer, you struck down restricted covenants, and the population grew in Detroit. By 1970, half of the population of Detroit was African American, and look how segregated the city still was. This is our history, and it's something we still have to overcome. So in the 1950s, Detroit's facing a critical shortage, housing. We need to do something with the old factories. What's our urban renewal strategy? We elected a mayor, Albert Coble, for whom Coble Hall is named, who chose a campaign of racial divisiveness. He ran the kind of us versus them campaign that as Detroit's done so much damage. And here was his main promise, that we're going to acquire the land in these backward sections and sell the properties back to private developers. With the city built end to end, he was going to take the land in the backward section, give them to private developers. What were the backward sections? The two most intensely populated African American neighborhoods in the city of Detroit. Paradise Valley, which basically ran along where 375 and 75 are now up to Grand Boulevard, and Black Bottom, south of Gratiot, where Lafayette Park is today. Took those areas and said, we're going to turn those over to private developers. At a time people needed a place to go. Well, there are 400 businesses in Paradise Valley, nearly all African American owned. And look, this was Paradise Valley before the announcement, and here's how it looked after they built 375 and wiped out 400 businesses. And went into Black Bottom, where 7,000 families were put out of their homes. And it looked like that when they started, and it looked like that afterwards. And here's the tragic thing. More than 90% of the residents of Black Bottom were tenants. They were renters. Because, of course, they couldn't get mortgages. They were redlined. As tenants, they didn't get any break. They didn't get bought out. The owners of the property got bought out. Many times the owners of the property were not African American. But these 7,000 families were left to go wherever they wanted and just displaced. Many of them migrated over to an African American area over on 12th Street, where violence erupted not too long afterwards. And so Lafayette Park got rebuilt, and the former residents couldn't afford to be there. This is our history. And so when Dr. Martin Luther King gave his first I Have a Dream speech, it was in Detroit at Coble in 1963. And fair housing was a big part of it, because we were at a crossroads in the 50s and 60s. People were starting to move out. We were at a time we needed to act. And you have to look back and you say, okay, I've heard the stories for you, right? Detroit's decline, the violence in 1967, Mayor Coleman Young, that's what drove everybody out. Wayne State issued this report. If current trends continue, Detroit will lose 25% of our population by the end of the decade. You know when they issued that report? March 1963. The seeds of Detroit's decline were rooted in the decisions of the 40s and 50s. And Wayne State recognized it in 1963. But today, he said, here's our new thing. What if space for everybody. How different would Detroit's history? And so now we're at another historic point. For the first time in 50 years, the population is slowing, and I believe is starting to grow. These are the monthly reports that Jerry Anderson and DTE sends me of residential utility hookups. The census data is a year old. This is a month old, and you can see we're seeing growth. Now we have an opportunity to plan for that growth. How are we going to build this city for the next 40 or 50 years? And if we fail again, I don't know if the city can come back. And so you say, well, okay, how does that really relate to Detroit today? You look around the country and you look at Brooklyn, where nobody 10 years ago could have imagined this, but minorities are being pushed out of Brooklyn in huge numbers with the rapid development. Go over to Washington, D.C. and see what happened. This is the developments going on there. The blue is the African-American concentration of population in Washington, D.C. 20 years ago. And here's how it is today. Look at the number of minorities that have been pushed out by a lack of planning as growth was coming. And so what we are trying to do is say this. Can't happen here, right? Well, we watched this in 2013. I got a chance to have lunch with a group of seniors. A week later, they had an eviction notice. 127 low-income seniors in downtown Detroit, been in their apartments for 20 years, all got evicted. Why? Because the federal tax credits for low-income housing, and this is the way low-income housing works in this country, it's one of the few things Republicans and Democrats agree on. Rather than building huge public housing projects, the federal government will say, I'll subsidize you the difference between what you could get at the market and what your lower income residents can afford. So if they can afford $600 a month and your market's $900 a month, we'll subsidize $300 a month in tax credits over 30 years. This building, nobody did anything illegal. 30-year tax credits ran out. Owner sold the building. Somebody else bought it. Good day, market rate housing, you guys are out. As if the 127 families who didn't have any legal right to stay, the assumption was they didn't have any moral right to stay. And so they got pushed out. And when you look beyond that and see when they went in and visited their former place, which now looks like that, after they'd been there 20 years, you can imagine the feeling. And the feeling there, was it a fluke? 2,200 more units run out in the federal subsidies between now and 2019, which means what you saw there could happen 2,200 more times. This is a very real concern. And so for people who have grown up in the city and know there's a history of the poor being pushed out when the market provides an opportunity, I hired Aaron, and he's now writing the stories for the city of Detroit of the comeback of the neighborhoods. He's got the kind of edge that I want. So I said, okay, I went and hired two nationally prominent people, Maurice Cox, Arthur Jemison. I said, I want a clear vision for urban redevelopment. Who have been here. Can we redevelop our city without wiping out our neighborhoods? And here are the 8 principles that if you are thinking about moving or investing in Detroit, this is what governs our decisions. One, everybody's welcome in our city. Detroit's a welcoming city. At our core, that's what we believe. Second, we're not going to support development if Detroiters are moved out so other people can move into their homes. We're not going to do it. Radical, but seems fair, doesn't it? Okay? We're going to fight economic segregation. We're not going to have one area of the city for the rich and one area of the city for the poor. If you want to live in Detroit, people, we want to build neighborhoods of density where your daily needs can be met within walking distance of your home. Are going to have a voice in what happens in their neighborhood. It won't just be the government. We're going to move jobs and businesses as close to the neighbors as possible, and the Detroit riverfront belongs to everybody. Those are 8 principles. So, how this is going. First principle, I have great partners on Detroit City Council. And one thing we agree on, we're pro-immigration. We support people who moved out of Detroit moving back. We're trying to keep our young talent stay in the city. We invite people from other countries. City Council and I have been completely united on something that's not true in every city. We believe deeply the city is going to be welcome to everybody. Okay. Second, we're not going to move out Detroiters so other people can move in. You say, well, how can you stop that? One, no tax breaks for any development that displaces residents or reduces the number of affordable units. The interesting thing is in Detroit, if you come by a market rate building and somebody buys it and somebody sells it, the government can't legally do anything about it. But if you buy a building with low income housing and you want to make it market rate, today the finances don't work if you don't get tax credits. So the City Council and I have said, we're not giving you tax credits, tax breaks for that. Second, we're going to go after every single one of those 22 HUD-supported units, and I'm going to sit down, and Arthur Jefferson is going to sit down with every single building owner. We're going to preserve every single one of them. Sounds hard, but we're doing it. And then we're going to establish a housing trust fund to support those owners who stay with us. And you say, okay, is that really going to work? Well, a couple months ago, 165 units on Washington, the Stevens building and the Industry building. Tax credits were expiring. Building owner was looking to sell. 165 folks were going to be out on the street, including some of the people that got bumped out of 1214 Griswold. Guaranteed 30 years of affordable housing. We can do this, and we can keep people downtown. We reached an agreement with Rivercrest and East Jefferson. 161 affordable units were going to expire. And we aren't just preserving them. This is the kind of quality that we're building, because affordable units typically are people making under $30,000 or under $40,000 a year. And we're doing this in all areas of the city. I know Dennis Archer sitting there, and he recognizes it because it's right down the street from the Manoogian. We are building these kinds of residences and preserving them in all parts of the city. And so now we've already got agreements in place on all those red squares, 1,200 units each case, renovating kitchens, renovating bathrooms, renovating the facades with developers who have agreed to preserve them. This can be done if the city values it. And so we are proving to people, you don't have to move Detroiters out. These developers are making money keeping people here. Third principle, we're going to fight economic segregation. It would be so easy in this city to have one area of the city be all wealthy people, another area be all poor people. And you have to work really hard at it every single day. And if you think about the fact that in the middle of this climate, in the middle of people being thrown out on Griswold, in the middle of this sense that things were changing, the voters of Detroit elected me as the mayor. The African-American community voted for me. And I can't tell you what an enormous responsibility that feels like, because people believe that I would deal with this fairly. And this is probably something that I care more about. Here's what we adopted, City Council and the mayor together, that if we give financing to any housing development in any neighborhood, a minimum of 20% of the units have to be guaranteed as affordable. And so that means at 80%, those earning under 40,000, 60%, those earning under 30,000. 20% of your units are going to be set aside for people who are verified to make that income. Now, this sounds like some liberal thing can't possibly work, right? I'm not really much into, yes, see, I hear some of you Republicans out there laughing. But I'm not much into ideas that don't work. So let me just show you what happened. So the Strathmore, a building I know well, when I was the Wayne County prosecutor, I seized it from the dope dealers that were dealing out in front of it. And you can see it's 2 blocks down the street from the Detroit Medical Center. It's what it looked like when I took office. And here's how it looks to Richard Barron, major developer from New York. Okay, Orleans Landing, the first new housing built on the riverfront in years. You can't have affordable housing on the riverfront. 20% of these units are set aside as affordable. People of all incomes can work and live on the waterfront. Ducharme Place in Lafayette Park just opened now. 20% affordable units. And on Friday, the Illiches and their partner announced Detroit's largest housing development in 20 years. You didn't see this. 4 historic buildings renovated. We believe in saving the buildings we've got. 2 new apartment buildings. 686 units total. $160 million investment. Okay, hottest area in Detroit. 20% of all of the units will be set aside as affordable in the heart of Detroit's hottest development. The fact is, the people who drive your buses, the people who answer your phones, those people who are working in your businesses should be able to live in the same neighborhood as the hockey players and the executives and the like. We should all work. We all work together. We should all live together. And right? So this is the old version. These are the old Douglas Towers. You had 900 people concentrated in 6 towers in one place. Okay? Instead of those towers came down 3 years ago, but here's what we've done. I've got 20 separate projects across the downtown and midtown area, 20 separate projects with 1,000 guaranteed affordable units. Instead of being stuck over here in 6 towers with the poor in one place and everybody else somewhere else, we have spread the affordable housing throughout greater downtown and midtown because this is what we believe as a city. Right? And so if you want to be in an area where people of all incomes, people of all jobs, people of all backgrounds live together, Detroit is a place to go. If you want to be in a different neighborhood, there's lots of choices in southeastern Michigan. And so we're trying to create an option for people who want to live in this manner.
Okay, so that's some of the talk. It goes on for another, say, 10 or 12 minutes. And then there's a radio interview, I'm sorry, a radio personality, Paul W. Smith, AM station that interviews him in a sort of arm chat, sort of informal way, and builds on the conversation. But I think that if you watch the remainder of the talk and then rewatch these first 30 minutes, these first 28 minutes, you'll be impressed by, I think, the arc, the large arc that is created by this very important historical perspective about the history of Detroit, half of which I'm familiar with because I'm uniquely situated because of my experience and my age to have actually experienced it, and then blend that with the even more sort of historical perspective of World War II and pre-World War II ramp up, and the conversation about Detroit being kind of the arsenal of democracy and being an attractive place to live and to settle in for all people. So I really appreciated the breadth, the way the information was displayed and illustrated. I appreciated the fast clip that the speaker articulates his sort of perspective. I appreciated the energy and passion of this presentation, and seeing him today in our office reminded me of this talk, which I assure you, he in effect dropped the mic at the end of it to a standing ovation. So the perspective here is an important one because it covers a lot of territory, from the history of residential development to the history of Black Bottom and Paradise Valley, which of course is kissing Brush Park itself, to the replacement of those neighborhoods with transportation networks like I-75 and 375, and then eventually the much heralded and important Lafayette Park, which is an entirely different conversation, an important one, and especially as architects, I'm sure we appreciate its detailing, its proportion, and its beautiful gardens. But to us, with this history, with this stigma, that I think plug, I'll just tell you this, our office is responsible for the restoration of the Strathmore Hotel and of Orleans Landing, the construction of Orleans Landing, which opened just the earlier this summer. We worked with Richard Barron on both of those projects, so I'm very gratified that the things that he's sort of recognized as incremental improvements towards the vision that he's articulated about one city for all of us has been made manifest in some of the work that our office has done. I want to go to a different conversation now, so bear with me, and share with you before we close out, if I can find it. And so I'm going to screen share once more, and I'm going to walk you through a series of design drawings that are available at the city. These are our firm's drawings for various properties in the Brush Park neighborhood. And this is actually a design package that went before the City Historic District Commission. This is for the area south of the City Modern Detroit properties. This is a plate that talks about doing contemporary modern architecture in historic neighborhoods. Talking a little bit about the Secretary of the Interior's, and I'll upload this to the Google Drive for you, but I just want to walk you through the comprehensiveness that our firm sort of took to this effort. A quick Duggan-esque painting of history of urban form, certainly in Brush Park 50 years ago, the turn of the century, of the 21st century, and then today. And then, quite honestly, the nuts and bolts drawings, right? The site plans, and these are the footprints of the buildings, and they're showing basic orientation, primary locations, snapshots early on of what it looked like, what streetscapes for residents and businesses might look like, what a pocket park as a gap between buildings might look like, and talking a little bit here about the zoning ordinance, and taking apart the ordinance and all of its tenets and creating this kind of graphical icon that then finds its way into not only a more elaborate description of each of the tenets, like relationship of texture or materials or building height or proportion. This is all language right out of the ordinance, but these icons, these images, were things that our office created to simplify and orient the content. And then we then set that against this Norman Foster quote, "As an architect, you design for the present with an awareness of the past for a future which is essentially unknown." The obligatory SketchUp 3-dimensional aerial that then starts to show the annotations of what you're looking at, along with the icons that link the viewer back to the ordinance. And then we start to illustrate each of the buildings. This one is the building east of Brush Street. That's what we call it. It is both parking deck and apartments. We went to great pains to select materials that related to an existing building that you see in the lower left. And then we did the rendering. This is looking south on Brush toward Field, as well as the Renaissance Center. And then we show new plates that illustrate what I call the Three Sisters. These are the west of Brush apartment buildings. These have 39 units in them, ladies and gentlemen. So this is kind of the footprint of what 39 looks like in Detroit on a site not far from yours. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, I'm circling the site that you're dealing with this term up here in the upper left. And so you can see our footprint for 124 Edwards is not too dissimilar to the footprint we came up with. 124 Edwards from our office is a little bit larger in quantity than what you've been asked to do this semester. But I think it's important to see what we did with three similar but slightly varied that quite literally. They are all genetically related. They all have the same number of units. They have the same kinds of units in terms of 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms. They have the same square footages of retail, yet, and they have all brick. They all have aluminum sash and glass, right? They have stone, they have metal, but they all have a different kind of genetic imprint, and they have a different approach to massing. These, you will see, this is actually the Brush Street elevation looking west. So these will be apprehended or seen in this fashion from the Brewster Towers site that the mayor just spoke about a moment ago. And then we dial in, right, and discuss each building in terms of its materials, in terms of its color palette, in terms of its texture. Here's another building. We locate that building in a key plan on the lower left with a north arrow. We show the elevation. We call out each of the materials. We show photographs of the actual material. And we indicate, like in this bubble on the lower right, where some of those cues in the neighborhood are coming from. So we're always, in the new design drawings, you guys, we're always still making the case for this kind of language of architecture. And then the third sister is the southernmost building, and you can see that our materials again come from the context, but it is clearly not something that looks like it comes from the context. It emerges from it in terms of its sort of essence, right? We repeat some of the shots. These now are the townhomes. The townhomes are 3 and 4 stories, mostly 4-story buildings. They're side by side. They create the rhythm that the neighborhood of Brush Park once had. So what's interesting about what you could do in Brush Park is create a monolith footprint, if you will, like we did for the Three Sisters. But even so, even still, our firm's approach was to striate the massing in a vertical manner or fashion so that they were evocative of that rhythm of building gap, and so on, that the original Brush Park mansions possessed. So our townhomes have that kind of essence to them. And here's a shot showing us the southernmost apartment building on the right of this perspective, one of the existing historic Brush Park mansions that you'll have to deal with to the left of this image, and then our building sitting amidst that context, showing how context is being activated by recognizing the belt line, by recognizing cornice lines, by stepping back to allow like a 4-story building to be apprehended visually on the street as a 3-story mass, so that it doesn't seem so tall or maybe so oppressive. Even not building in all of the lot so as to preserve some open space to demur or defer, right, to the historic property when we pressure the context with our new work, as you see in the perspective and as you see in the elevation drawing below. I want you to see how much is going on in each of these drawings, how a lot of the real estate on each of these plates is used to convey the message. That perspective enlarged, and the context for the very first building I showed you is part of this drawing as well, showing real people at an eye level that makes the architecture, and as in the drawing, something that you and I walking down the street or riding our bike or driving along the street so that we feel like we're actually there. I take great care in making sure that we rarely do aerial perspectives, because the message is one of detachment. It begins to articulate a vision of architecture as an objective thing. I think that these kinds of drawings, you guys, where we're at the street level, help create the subjective quality of what architecture can be and how it can be illustrated. And we also take great care to show the racial diversity in the users and the occupiers of our renderings. Then the carriage houses, that's actually an old term. This is a new product. It's a new invention. You know, these old historic Brush Park mansions, you guys, always had carriage houses. Remember, these were done. These were built. These homes were built before there were cars, right? So, and these were homes in Brush Park that were for the wealthier lumberyard owners, the mill owners, the furrier and beaver and pelt business people. These were built, these mansions in Brush Park. These were the people that lived there, and these people had people like you and me working for them. And so someone like Tracy and me could live in a carriage house above the stable, which you would call today a garage, right, where the horses lived. And so they had a similar language. They had a similar material sensibility. These historic carriage houses, they had a different scale, but they were kind of mini-me kind of thing. And so our carriage houses, like the carriage houses that we deployed in City Modern Detroit, just up the street, were smaller, more incremental, a little bit fussier, a little bit more active in their push and pull, in their rise and fall as they march down the street, but always allowing the carriage where the front door is, so that you could come and go independent of what was happening in the townhouse at the other side of the property. And that meant that in this case, the alley became an integral part of the experience of the carriage house. And here's just another detail of that. That's the alley view. And then this drawing that we created that just shows you the Ransom Gillis house on the left, one of the carriage house, a segment of the carriage house in the centerpiece, one of the townhouses, and then more of the other existing townhomes in Brush Park that exist today, and showing the datum lines, right? You remember that from first year, the datum lines that talk about where peaks are, where the tops of cupolas are, where floor lines are, where plinths and bases are. So this kind of drawing shows, we hope, I think effectively, how our work is actually deferential, right, to the existing context, but it's a fresh, interpretation of the context, because just like these carriage houses were contemporary, modern iterations of complicated residential life, then so too are our interpretations of complicated residential life in our project called Brush Park South. So I'm sorry if you endured my lecture last fall, because I showed this project along with another project that we were doing. I didn't really talk about it, but I did review the drawings, and perhaps looking at these again, you maybe said, "Oh, I remember these now in the Brick Gallery." Maybe some of you live nearby and had a chance to see those and maybe look at them a little bit more carefully than how quickly I looked at them with you tonight. But in any event, these were the things that we showed last year, and I'm happy to report that the low income tax housing credits, the LIHTC funding that the applicant, our developer, went for was approved, and we expect to mobilize our team that did the design, and now they are going to move this project into a very hasty design development and then construction drawings effort at Hamilton Anderson. And I expect that in the next 12 months, we will be scratching earth for the largest building at East September of 2017. That's what I had planned for you tonight. I want to pause now, and we're going to take a quick break, but I want to give you a chance to maybe reflect on what you've just seen and what you just experienced with Mr. Duggan's presentation, because I want to make sure that your voices are heard in this, and that it's not just all me, although I don't mind sharing my enthusiasm with you. So I open the floor to you all.
I did have a question. I actually saw the entire video and I thought it was very interesting. Where you proposed the project, you also put 20% dedicated for affordable living?
Yes, we do. We try to dial that up a little bit more, especially if we know the owner group, the developer, has experience doing that or a commitment to doing that. In the case of Mr. Ria, who is in New York but is from Detroit originally, it was very easy for him to go that way. But of course, it is a, as the mayor articulated, it is a threshold now for tax credits within the city. So if you're going to get the city's support, if you're going to get their advocacy, then you need to do that. The mayor is devoutly committed to that, and honestly, we are as well, as a minority business firm, a minority business enterprise, a firm owned by an African American who was raised in Detroit, who went to Detroit public schools, who went to the University of Detroit Mercy, and has practiced in Detroit for the last 35, 40 years, to be honest. Yeah, it kind of runs in our blood at Hamilton Anderson as well. So yes, it happens, but it's something like, when you go to Richard Meyer to design a building or Daniel Libeskind to design a building, you kind of know what you're going to get. And I think the same thing is true for our firm. Anyone else? So again, this was meant to sort of create kind of like a backdrop, a sticky backdrop, an adhesive backdrop that a lot of the things that you're going to be digging into will stick to. Things that you're going to be reading in the David Maraniss book, things that we'll be talking about, things that you'll be drilling into as you do the research, will start to sort of align with or connect to the things in this very fast-paced talk that the mayor gave in late May of this year, or early June real test, the real mission is to design a capable, competent, well-conceived building in historic Brush Park in the context of that immediate neighborhood, along with the architects doing work in City Modern Detroit. That's the agenda, right? That's the manifest agenda. That's what you're graded on. But ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't heard it by now, architecture is more than just filling in the program. Architecture has to have a reason. It has to have a hook. It has to have a narrative. And the narrative for anything happening in Detroit today is set against the narrative we've been sort of learning about these last few days, and in any other projects that you've been working on in Detroit in your studios heretofore. All right. Questions? Bueno. Let's take a 5-minute break. What I'd like to do is over the next 2 days, meet with each of the teams. Michael, is Michael here? I saw him earlier. Michael created the list. Maybe if someone can pull up that list of all of the sort of research teams. What I'd like to do is listen to you and react to what you're doing. Maybe show me where you are, talk to me about some obstacles that you're having. I can meet with all of you tonight. I have no problem with that. And if we do that, we can do that again on on Thursday night. But my goal is to meet with each of you just to make sure that you're moving forward, to make sure that I'm available to answer any questions, and maybe nudge you or direct you in a way that's going to help you be more effective, and maybe give you some resources as well. And then I'm going to share with you a whole bunch of stuff on Google Drive, including the mayor's talk from tonight. So it doesn't matter to me how you all want to organize it. If you guys were all together working in an office, which is maybe how you need to think of yourselves sometimes, particularly when moments like this come up, spend a couple of minutes together right now and decide if you want to visit all of us tonight or over the next 2 nights. And then which ones do you want to talk, which ones want to talk first and which ones want to talk next? So maybe hammer out a list that, or a schedule, and we'll do that. So I'll come back at 6:45 Eastern time, and we'll go from there. I'll do whatever you need me to do from there on. Okay. So I'll see you in 10, and we'll have a schedule hopefully. Thanks.
Guys, I can screen share the list of research teams just to be helpful.
Okay, you should make another Google Sheet that's just a sign-up list for desk crits.
Okay, and then just share that in the comments. Yeah, that would work.
Gosh, you can pick, I don't care.
Or you could even keep it if you want in the same document. You can just like make a new, I think you can make like a new sheet within that same one. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah. I'll just make another sheet. Does anybody want to go first?
I'll go first. So I'm not available on Thursdays, so I would like to go today.
Who's that speaking?
It's, Carmen.
Okay. I'll make sure I screen share. Okay. Do we all want to go today or split it up?
It doesn't really matter for me. I still have a lot of work to do on the site model, so I will go last if he has time for me. If not, I'll go Thursday. I do have a question though. Do you guys need like a plan for your work?
Wait, Mike, what'd you say? I couldn't hear you. There was like background noise.
Do you guys need anything from me to complete your work? Like, I know some of you will probably do mapping and things. And I'm doing the model, so I don't know if you need that from me to finish. Does that make sense?
I don't need it, Courtney. Andrew and I don't need it either.
Okay, that's good. I'll take my time on.
But I can take. I can probably take pictures of the site, like if you want this weekend.
I've taken some pictures of the site. We definitely need more, and
Okay.
I might have been the wrong site. I don't know. I didn't actually look at the briefing, so there's that.
Michael, if you need pictures, I was there over the weekend and I also took pictures of it. If you got
Nice.
the wrong site, I can always send them to you.
I'm gonna go back there regardless. Here, I'm gonna make a folder on the drive. So anyone who takes pictures, just dump them in there.
Marco, when do you want to go? Andrew's nowhere to be found.
What, Rasha?
Oh, when do you want to go? Carmen's going first.
I said I don't really care.
Okay, we can touch base with him today, I think, and just tell him like the route we're looking into and the articles that we found. If you want to go like second or third, who knows.
Hi, Michael. I just sent an edit request. I can't input any information on the research assignment sheet currently.
Edit request. What?
Yeah, I have view only permissions for the sheet.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat, Michael.
Are you guys using your LTU email?
Yep.
Yeah.
Shit. All right, I made it so anyone with a Lawrence Tech email can edit. It's loading, but I should solve that.
I'll do a refresh and let you know if I can. Thanks.
Do we want to have like time slots with these things or just numbers?
Just do numbers.
I don't know how long he's gonna want to talk to each of us.
Yeah, I think it'll vary too much based on the group.
So is the idea then, I guess, to stay on the call and we can choose to mute while other crits are going on and listen in on those discussions if we desire and go
I
from there?
think that's what's gonna happen, yeah.
Courtney, are you still there? This is Carmen.
Yeah.
So I had a question about InDesign. How do I get rid of the pink? Like the pink highlight?
Okay, so I'm guessing that's only on the text, so you might not have that font.
Oh, that might be it. So what font was it?
When you, I'll check the font again, and I'll probably email it or link it on here. But I just went to Typekit, which is kind of when you drop down on the fonts. There's a button that says Typekit, and you can download things right to Adobe programs like InDesign.
Okay.
So that's where I got the ones that I used, and I'll make sure to share those right
Yeah,
now.
that'd be great.
Thanks for asking.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm back.
Hello.
Okay, who wants to meet?
Well, we have a list that I'm kind of sharing for today and for Thursday.
Lovely. So the idea would be then that for those of you that have cordially agreed to talk tonight, the others, for those of you who have agreed to talk tonight, you won't need to be in the Thursday night session, although I encourage you to be there. And similarly, for those of you who have agreed to meet with me Thursday night, you don't need to hang around tonight, although I think it's in your best interest, again, to move from the sort of very general to the particular. But in any case, I won't take any issue if you aren't going to stick around. I know how that works. So the list is going to be where? In an email to me?
I'm screen sharing it right now, but we can also email it to you.
So who's talking right now?
Courtney.
Where are you in? So I'm not seeing it. I just have, there it is. Thank you. I see it. Okay, so Carmen's going to go first, and then you, Courtney, and then Rasha, Andrew, and then Lynn in Ottawa, and then Eric and Joshua. Okay, so that leaves. Are you filling in the rest on Thursday, or because it looks like it's a little heavy for tonight?
Yeah.
So we might need to migrate one of those groups.
I guess that is our whole class.
Right, because of the way that it all sort of broke down.
I can move to Thursday if that's needed. This is Lynn.
Great, thank you, Lynn.
No problem. Do you want me to take the first slot then on Thursday if it's blank right now?
Sure, yeah, because well, that's the other. I want to be here at 5:30 to move right into class and then finish then. And then Michael, you and I you can be the caboose, Michael, and you can just talk to me about how your process is going. I mean, your research effort is a little sort of different, but it's still one I'm interested in. And I have some things that I might be able to share with you, and I wanted to talk to you about that. Okay. So, okay, so you're all free to go. You all are, but I do think it's probably helpful to maybe, especially if there are things that you're hearing and you say, oh, wait a minute, I have something that might help them in that regard. So that in that way, it's rather helpful. So I'm going to click over on Carmen and give you the floor, and which is good because you're not going to be around on Thursday anyway. So this worked out nicely for you, right?
Yes. All right. So
Good.
Mine was the research of the city of Detroit and Brush Park. So I had watched the video about the mayor on Friday, on Friday, and that's where I was kind of getting the history of the urban form. So I was making a timeline, kind of like about the things that he was talking about, but put them in order. And I thought they were very interesting. And then I started elaborating just a little bit more on some things that he didn't talk about as much. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you see it?
I can.
Okay, so currently it's just in Word, and then I'm going to be putting it in InDesign. So I have the history of urban form and just a timeline of why the urban crisis started, and why Detroit is the way that Detroit was a couple of years back. So the
And
house
you know, by the
shortage.
way, his talk, by the way, is not only a video that you can look at, but if you follow the mayor on, maybe or if you go to Twitter and look up the 2017 Michigan Policy Conference or something like that, you might be able to find a PowerPoint presentation, the actual prez.
Okay.
And having that, right? It allows you.
Very helpful.
Right, it allows you to maybe harvest some of the imagery. That's not only for you, but for anyone else that, you know, they sort of saw something that they think might be central to their research. So if you continue to like nose around, which is how a lot of important people seem to run their campaigns and their offices, you know, you can find that stuff there. So for what that's worth.
Okay, perfect. So again, just the timeline. Within the timeline, I did start to put it into InDesign. I am new to InDesign. I work more in Illustrator, but I'm starting to finally put in the images and the data that I wanted to use. So going back into my information. So I was going to start talking about a little bit about the population in Detroit in the 1900s versus the 1970s, which is when the population dropped. The Detroit redlining, which I thought was very interesting as well. Why the discrimination and why the zones were so different, and separating the people, like the richest with the poorest, which is a big problem in Detroit. The Detroit riots, also very important. The fights, it was a 5-day fight. How the quantity of people that lost their homes. And then also a little bit about the mayor of Detroit and what he's doing, how many changes he has made in the past. He was elected in 2013, so it's been 4 years. And
right,
all the
he's up
changes.
for election now.
Yes, and his principles, which were very interesting. And then I did go to the site on Sunday, and I took pictures of the site, and then I took pictures of the neighborhood, and I found pictures of how the homes were before.
Right.
For example, this is in 1881. This is how the home was in the year 2000. And then I took a picture of it and how it is now that they finished the restoration.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just have
so
a couple.
I'm just remembering, just remembering, Carmen, the name of an individual who wrote an article. She was interviewed on Stephen Henderson on his WDET morning program. Her name is Emily Kutil. Look it up, Kutil. And she did, she had an article in February of this year bringing Detroit's Black Bottom back to virtual life. If you type her name in, she has some videos, and then she her research has been sort of published in a lot of places, but I think the things that she has for you that will help our class understand the Brush Park community as an architectural artifact will be really useful. So these historic photographs, I think, are really spot on. I spent, in preparation for a lecture that I gave on Brush Park up at Ferris State, I spent like 3 hours just digging and drilling into the Burton Historical Library, into the Detroit Public Library, into Emily's articles, all of the photographs that I could find to paint kind of a mosaic picture of architectural form and the residential typology. I hardly scratched at the surface, but I think that's maybe Emily's work would be useful for you.
Okay, I will.
I also think the David Moranis book doesn't necessarily have a chapter on Brush Park. He talks about it anecdotally, or in terms of the like that play out in Brush Park and about Brush Park. But I think what you've been talking about in this first page of your writing is coincidental to Mr. Moranis's writing, and I would encourage all of you to, if you haven't read it by now, to get that book ASAP and read it before the weekend, because it's going to really cue up a very complete picture of the city when it reached its zenith and how it prefigures what happened later. Screen share if you weren't finished.
That is all I have for now.
Okay, so I think the other things that you know, as an architect, when you document a place, like remember that the height relationships drawings that I showed you tonight, where I showed you several of the sort of front facades of Brush Park, and then a couple of our pieces kind of shoehorned in that datum and baseline. Sometimes it's important for you to help architects see the context from an architectural perspective, not just a timeline perspective, not just a narrative perspective, but from an actual architectural thing. So you may want to talk with Michael Mosley about anything that he has on in his effort to model this neighborhood, and what you can learn from the physicality of the neighborhood in terms of being able to talk about these buildings in terms of materials like limestone and brick, in terms of architectural elements like windows, round top windows, mulled windows, rounded windows, dormer windows, in terms of turrets and oriels, in terms of style, right? In terms of just proportion, and just talking about these things so that what you learn is something that can translate to Paige or to Nancy or to Louis, so that they all have the same information. So you have a hard one because you have to cover so much ground, but I think the history of Brush Park is, I think, is responsible to cover the sort of physicality of that stuff, and maybe working with Michael and Courtney, some of the area is not just the residential buildings in Brush Park, but also some of the commercial buildings and the other buildings in Brush Park that are like the apartment buildings, so that we understand again the materiality of Brush Park, the massing, and if there are any parks in Brush Park, we'll want that as well. So there's your research, I think, has a buckshot responsibility, right? You're going to shoot a lot of pellets at a lot of targets, and create kind of a picture of the area from that kind of sort of vantage of diffusion.
Okay. It does, yes.
And so since you're not going to be around here to do some of the on sort of campus stuff, you may need to ask a favor of others that are here to help you contribute to that, and you can do something for them in exchange.
Okay.
From where you'll be. Okay.
Yeah.
You got to work as a team. Now, I don't know, when we talked the other night, I don't know if I mentioned authenticity or not, but I think part of the thing our office, the thing we talk about, the thing we struggle with, because it's always changing, is what is authentic. And this is more of a theoretical question. This is more of a philosophical question. But maybe listening to the mayor's talk tonight, again, maybe reading a little bit more deeply into the David Moranis book, along with anything else that you're going to be talking about, maybe listening to a couple of Stephen Henderson's talks about Detroit and where it's going and from his perspectives. But how does an architect, and this is kind of what I'm asking you to think about, how does an architect do something that is of its time, and is not, retardataire, right? Is not derivative of an earlier time, is not mimicking another period, but is something that is true, something that is authentic. Not easy. I don't know what you to do. I don't know what that outcome or that deliverable looks like, but I'd like you to think about it, and I'd like you to think about this in terms of what examples you might know or see or discover here in Detroit, and maybe as well, what is it about? Maybe one of the ways you us not right. Maybe one of the ways you talk about authenticity of a place is to talk about other places, and talk about how we can look at Mexico City, for example, right, as an artifact, as a settlement, and what are the things that make it uniquely like of that place, of its epoch, and what and what are they, and itemize them, and then maybe those things actually do exist here. Doorways, paint color, window boxes, whatever it is, right? Maybe these things actually exist here, and we've never looked at those things as attributes of an architectural language, right? So part of the way that you can talk about who we are in research, not only you, Carmen, but everyone, is by not talking about us per se, but talking about other things. So that could be one line of attack. But comes with the question of what is authentic Detroit, or what is authentically Detroit. I don't know what it is. I mean, I know what it is for our office. I don't know how to talk about it. And so I'm kind of challenging you all to think about that. And I'm asking you, Carmen, to tee that up.
Okay, yes. I'll research a little
So
bit
that's
more.
like
I'm not quite sure what it is yet, but
yeah, that's a huge task. That's a huge order. But and you're not in, but you're going to have to, you all are going to have to start thinking about this. I mean, and I'm not asking you to like think about it and think about it and think about it like science looking for, you know, the solution to cancer. You have so much other stuff to be juggling right now, but in the context of design motivation, design intent, the best designs come from an awareness of place and an awareness of its virtue and an awareness of what is authentic. That's my message to you. That's what I'm imparting to you. But you have tons of other stuff. So it's not something I'm asking you to like ponder and ruminate on and think about till you die. That's what your career in Detroit will be for, right? You'll have time here to do that, here practicing in Detroit. But you need to give us, I think, Carmen, the tools to start addressing that. Needs to do. And you can survey, you know, you can survey people from Mexico City or wherever you're going, right? You can ask your classmates, the ones that live here, or you can ask Luis, who's not from here at all, and say, when you think about Detroit, what are the things come to your mind, right? Right. That's one way. Like the survey is one way of getting to it.
Yeah, they usually say like the burnt buildings, but that definitely is not it.
You know, because that is are as makers. Less maybe sentimental, productive, right? More about making this kind of architecture, more about thinking about architecture as a creative act of like drawing and, you know, fabricating architecture from a set of values, a set of perspectives. But yeah, like the ruin porn is certainly one of the things. M&M is another. Burners is another. Yeah, that's all good stuff. But maybe there's like a bedrock to all of that, right? Maybe it's like, you know, we're a community of makers, right? We're innovators, and here are examples of that. And then so like what's an example? What's like an architectural example of that, Carmen? Well, I can think of one. It's like Eero Saarinen working out the gaskets and the window, the aluminum sash and glass windows for the GM Tech Center, right? That's kind of a very direct invention or innovation that has an architectural implication that is you know, something you can document. And I imagine that there are others, right? So that maybe that.
All right, thank you. Yes.
Sure. So use your classmates to the extent that you can. Poll them, rely on them, and then you need to make yourself available to them in a reciprocal way while you're away. Make sure you stay in touch with all of us even while you're away. And if you can't be in the classroom on Thursday night, you can at least audit it in a YouTube video that I'll share with you, okay?
Okay, yes.
Cool. And one last thing, did you contact that individual that I suggested last Thursday night?
Not yet, no. So
Okay.
we're going to do that tomorrow.
Okay, I just wanted to know. All right, cool. I'll let you go.
Thank you.
Safe travels. Okay, Courtney, who's next? Everybody had their, I'm gonna mute Eric. Courtney, who's next?
Gotcha. There was really bad feedback, so I kind of turned it off. But I'm next. I pasted the list. Pasted the list on the side there in the chat. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I can now. So you're next.
Yeah.
Okay. So Courtney, which one are you doing?
The baby boomers aging.
Oh, good. Yeah. So now, yeah, I'm your audience for that because I am one.
Hello. As I've found.
And your parents actually may be too young to be one, but this
I have grandparents that are.
Good. Thank you. That makes me feel really young. So this is you know, there's not a lot of time to do all of this research, right? This is stuff that maybe, and this is for all of you, right? For all of you to hear. This is stuff that, you know, maybe as you get into it and as you apply your research to your comprehensive design studio exercise, you get really excited about. And for you, for example, and I can see that happening with Carmen, but for you, as an example, like I can see you kind of like chewing on this topic and going, wow, this is a really interesting thing. I'm going to kind of put a Post-it on it in my life experiences journal and get back to it and make it some sort of thetical effort when I do my thesis or when I get into advanced design studio. And just to fast forward to you, you know, Aaron Jones deals with aging in place and baby boomers in his studios. So, and he thinks about it in a number of ways. And these are some of the things that I want you to think about. And I want you to think about it as an architect, sort of like the way I was just talking to Carmen. For example, but I want to be open approaching it as well. But like Andreas Duani talks about aging in place. He's the noted that sort of created Seaside in Florida, a new urbanist community. But he talks a lot about how ordinances in our cities needs to when you buy your first home, Courtney, you can tell one of your grandparents or both of your grandparents to move into the apartment that you've designed, right, and built over the garage, right? Like, because current ordinances, like in our communities, usually discourage that kind of densification, the proposition of density. But the fact is that it actually makes better sense because the research suggests that if families are living closer together, right, they're good alone, they're better together. Like, so what's the intel on that? So there's lots of manifestations that are architectural or that have to do with planning, that talk about aging in place, that talk about baby boomers, but I'm just trying to nudge you to go, you know, beyond there's a lot of baby boomers. There's so many that it's in the millions, and they're going to drain all the Social Security money before I even get to it. I don't want that to be the story. I kind of want the story to be about their prerogatives, their choices. They're moving back into the city, or they're moving into suburbs like Ann Arbor or Ferndale, where they can walk everywhere and be everywhere in 20 minutes or less.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's easier to walk. Because you don't want me driving at that age. You want me walking. You see what I mean? So how are you thinking about it?
Along those lines,
how are you
actually,
approaching this research?
How I started out was I found links and different resources and based them on architecture and design related, and then just history of and basic facts. And I started with the architecture design side. So I actually started looking at how they're looking to go into cities where there's transportation easily accessed. They can maintain an active lifestyle, because most of them are not looking to retire at 65. Like there was a statistic, 20% don't even have a retirement plan written out. Most of their money is spent on travel and health, wellness, and then dog haircuts. So they're doing things actually that line up with the millennials that involve being in cities and having an active lifestyle. So and that's where I've started out. And yeah.
How interesting. And so when you think about it, like when you think about architecture as a more durable proposition and not one that anticipates obsolescence, when you anticipate that the baby boomers are all going to buildings can accommodate the swelling so-called millennial population that you comprise, or the Gen X population or the Gen Y, then Gen X populations that precede your sort of market, your demographic. So thinking about this from that vantage, that comparison is very interesting. I mean, ultimately, Courtney, thinking about quality of life, walkability, the 20-minute neighborhood, and seems like it's just, I don't want to say no-brainer, but it seems so logical and clear. So what I'd like to maybe suggest you do is to and nudge you into a direction or a theme of housing that I used to teach at school, called missing middle housing, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It was referenced in one of the documents I sent out last week, but missing middle housing is a housing innovation or a housing typology that innovates something that fits the gap between the single family residence that the mayor described today, that is also evidence everywhere in the world, which really began as post-World War II housing that started in Levittown, right, in New Jersey. So it goes somewhere between single family housing, which had its own issues, right, with the FHA and guaranteed loans and the like, and flats that are stacked, or apartments that are stacked, that no one, it seems, wants to really live in unless you're like from Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Toronto, or Miami, right, where living in a high rise is actually a luxury, or it's kind of like viewed as oh wow, you live up there, that's awesome. We here in Detroit don't really sort of embrace that, because there's a kind of a stigma associated between that typology and like Brewster that we talked about tonight. So missing middle housing is an innovation that situates itself between those two extremes.
Okay.
And it's talked about in the work of Dan Parolek, P-A-R-O-L-E-K, and his firm Optikos Design. I follow them on Twitter. He writes and lectures extensively on it. He's on YouTube. There's actually something called Missing Middle Housing, and our firm is one of the local experts on it now because we've been doing this for a while. But in a word, Courtney, it talks a little bit about taking the model and breaking it apart and putting it back together. Maybe thinking of it like community kitchens, community dining rooms, and community living rooms, but still having your own bathroom and your own bedroom and your own study and your own maybe laundry room, or maybe not a shared laundry room, you know, but cooperative housing or collaborative housing, commune housing. You know, there's things that they talk about in Missing Middle Housing that align with the smarter sensibility about living that boomers have been maybe a little resistant to going toward or moving into, but that the millennials, because of your own openness and your own sensibility and well-traveledness, are maybe more open to. So that, again, that comparison between makes some sense. But thinking about Missing Middle Housing as a dimension of your research may be useful. And then there's something called, this is a new theme altogether, TOD, right? Transit-oriented development.
Yeah.
So you can look that up. You can find and read more about that in the ULI, the Urban Land Institute. And you can look that up in the CNU, the Congress of New Urbanism. These are two huge resources. These are two huge entities that talk and talk and talk and write and have conferences on these things. In fact, the CNU was here in Detroit in 2016, right? They had their 1 week long conference. I gave a 3-hour walking tour for the attendees through the city of Detroit. So these are places that you can go to and start drilling into the pile of research, the pile of best practices that are being discussed at these things. So I would encourage you to look at that. And since this is an age-restricted building, right, for people that are 55 and older, the history of that typology in the USA, right? It's probably a somewhat dubious one, but I think you have to talk about it. I think you have to sort of show us what it has looked like. What does a senior citizen home look like? What's the difference between a senior citizen home and a assisted living and a convalescent home and a nursing home? And how big are they? What do they look like? What are examples of them as new construction? What happens when they're modified out of old mansions? You know, like think of East Grand Boulevard, for example, right? So I think you have an obligation to talk about that parallel between the millennials and the boomers that you articulated. I think you have to talk a little bit more about missing middle housing, transit-oriented development, and then the sort of history of the typology. Right? I think that's incumbent on you.
Okay. Yeah, I missed that last part, so good.
But again, thinking of Courtney as an architect, would. What would an architect need from your research? Right, in order to design. Always think about what you're saying, what you're giving as ammunition, right? As intelligence that a designer can use, that an architect can implement in her or his designs.
Okay. Cool.
Was that good?
Yes.
Any questions?
I just also want to say I looked at the got it highlighted, the AARP And they have an
Oh, yeah.
initiative on livable communities. And so they talk
Oh,
about
good.
8 different conditions on that makes a city or a community livable. And so I
One more
listed those
time on
out.
that. You just broke off.
Okay. Is it the dogs in the background? Hope not.
Could you repeat that?
There's 8 different conditions for making a community livable. And so they list out as like outdoor spaces, transportation, housing, social participation, employment, respect and social inclusion, communication information, and then community and health services. So I think that was 8, but yeah, so I was going to work into that too.
So that's kind of, so, okay, that's really interesting. And what you're kind of talking about, think about this as an architect, right? What is that? That's kind of like the building program. Like some of those are like program elements. So maybe some of what you can create for us is, since the agenda, right? Since the mission of this building is sort of thematically speaking, age restricted. What are the kinds of spaces in these buildings? And not just like, you know, janitor's closets and reception desks and blah, 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 all that sort of stuff, which is still important. I'm not belittling it, but I'm just saying, but talking about connectivity, talking about engagement and participation, talking about health, talking about life housing choices that will endure and be innovative for this demographic for the next 25 years. Because that's what I figure that's all I'm around for, right? I mean, just arithmetically speaking, right? So yeah, that's good. And so the AARP, you know, which is a lobby, right, to the federal government and a fraternity for people like me, is a good resource.
I think I'm good.
I am AARP, but I ain't retired, by the way.
All right.
Okay, good. I think those were the things that I thought that you ought to sort of look at. And obviously, if you come up with other things that, you know, kind of occur to you, feel free. But I think you're gonna open up CNU and ULI, and you're gonna go, oh my goodness! I mean, I had no idea that so many intelligent people are doing these things, and, you know, honestly making lifelong careers out of it. You could look, for instance, at the work of Peter Calthorpe, Calthorpe, and you could look at the work of Dover Coal Partners out of Miami, who have been planning these kinds of 20-minute neighborhoods, these 20-minute walkable communities, and hear and read their rhetoric, their narratives about what motivates them. You could look at, I think I'm on a roll here. You could look at a very interesting community called Serenbe, Serenbe. It's located outside of Atlanta, I think in the Tallahatchie neighborhood. It's near the west. It's west of the airport there. Have you been to Atlanta?
No, but I'll look.
So look it up. It's this beautiful, new, idyllic, but expensive, unfortunately expensive, community that is stridently walkable, full, and diverse within its own ability to be so, given the wealth factor. But here's the hook. It conflates ideas about walkable, blended, mixed neighborhoods with, get this, farming, and they stitch them together, and so, you know, I'm not saying do a farm on the but the farm becomes kind of a link to healthful food choices, right? Responsible diets, right? That kind of thing. That's maybe another sort of resource for you. Serenbe. Cool.
Okay.
That's all I got.
Thanks.
You know, maybe, by the way, since you, since I know I can ask you this, you know, I released everyone else to go on about what they want to do, whether it's watch Wheel of Fortune or Thursday, but I overlooked, right, the class that Ash is going to be running tonight. So maybe send a note to remind them that I'm leaving this class. Okay, so just maybe remind them of that.
I didn't hear what you just said. It broke up a lot.
Thank you. So you can do that for me?
I didn't hear anything you just said.
So Ash is coming into this Google Hangout at around 9 or 9:30, and
Okay.
he'll want to see everyone. So maybe remind your classmates that Tuesday and Thursday nights he's meeting with you.
Okay.
Even though I said you could go on and watch Wheel of Fortune or do whatever you all do.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. I'll see you soon. Thanks, Courtney. Let's see. Rasha and Andrew. So I can't talk to both of you at the same time unless you guys are sitting next to each other. That would be the only way that would work.
We could have been, but we're not.
You could have been.
I was actually talking on the phone with him as we were doing this, and we were.
That could have worked too, but we probably would have gotten reverb.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
So Andrew and Rasha, what are you all looking at?
We're looking at hybrid buildings, mixed-use hybrid buildings.
Awesome. That's my specialty. So I love this topic. Actually, I love all these topics, but I do this for a living. And I taught a studio on mixed-use hybrid buildings before I did the missing middle stuff at Lawrence Tech. So I'm going to hold back and let you talk to me about what you guys have been thinking about, what you guys have been like getting into.
So we were looking at. Okay, let me. How do I share my screen? Do you know how to I share my screen? I can't. Oh wait, here you go. Screen share. Okay. Can you see my screen?
I can.
Okay, so we were looking at a couple different sites, and we're looking at trying to understand the challenges and benefits of mixed-use facilities, so understanding what the pros and cons are. So that was one article that was really interesting. I gave information about that, and we're trying to understand. We're trying to look at see different case studies that would show us what the benefits are. Like some case studies that showed us, you know, the pros of mixed use, and some case studies where maybe it wasn't as apparent. And so we were on ArcDaily, and we were looking at different case studies here, but a lot of them on ArcDaily are larger scale than what we're doing.
Yeah, they are. They're high density, high rise usually.
Yeah, that's exactly what I found on ArcDaily. Even one was just released, one about a building in downtown Detroit. It was literally just released yesterday, which was interesting though. A lot larger than what we're looking at, but that was a good read.
The Schmidheimer Lawson piece?
Yes.
Yeah.
This one. So It's different than what we're doing,
Yeah,
but and Andrew also found a video. Andrew, do you want to talk about the video?
Oh yeah, it's just it's a panel and it's 3 people from different cities around and just talking about different projects going on. Like the first one, I didn't read the whole video yet, but it was in San Francisco, and their primary thing was actually doing with old people. So I got to go back and watch the rest of the video though. But it kind of dealt with the same things that we'll be dealing with in the studio from what you've told us.
I'm sorry, Andrew, could you repeat? You said their primary thing was, and then you broke.
They said dealing with old people in the cities, so it had to deal with kind of like what we're going to discuss in the studio. Yes. So,
yes. Do you remember, Andrew, who that was?
No, I have the link though.
Is it David Baker?
No, it was a girl. Can't think of her name.
Okay. I'd be interested to know who that was. So I'm nudging you toward David Baker Architects,
Okay.
who is in San Francisco. That's why I went that way. I think David Baker is one of the most these mixed-use buildings that are residentially driven in the country, and I think his work is pretty unbelievable. The current work is amazing, but I think a really good example of a community of living opportunities that is interesting is the Tessefaranga complex that he did there. And then I think there's a really important architect. She was here 2 years ago. She's from Los Angeles. Julie Eisenberg, Eizenberg. Her husband is Hank Koenig, so it's Koenig Eisenberg Architects, KEARC.com, I think. She lectures. David Baker lectures. So these are people that you can learn about their motives and their perspectives on these mixed-use buildings, whose portfolios are more aligned with ours, sort of low-rise / mid-rise high density. So I think these would be 2 excellent architects to consider. I don't want to rule out the other ones that you found, but I'm looking at a list of people. Michael Maltzan is another one, Maltzan. Loha, who's doing work here right now, LOHA, real important. Let's see, ISA out of Boston. Lord Ack Sargent, who actually has an office here in Detroit. So you can talk to them. They hail from Atlanta, but they actually have a PDF that you can review. It's a multi-page presentation that talks about the virtues, right, and benefits of mixed-use buildings. So I would encourage you to look at that.
What was the name of that one?
Lord Ack Sargent, AECK. These are 3 different names: Lord Ack, AECK, and Sargent, SARGENT. They have an office here in like Farmington Hills. And then a firm out of, I think, Winnipeg is doing some really interesting low-income housing. It's a number, so you have to write it down. It's 546-8796 Architecture, Inc. And then another one in New York called 1100 Architect. They're doing some very interesting work. Each of these firms, among many others, are sort of engaging the role of an architect, in the discussion of these in these mixed-use buildings that include retail, that include residential, that include parking, that are responsive and responsible to the context. So I think these are good starts. Zimmer Gunsel Frasca, who you've pulled up here, Rasha, ZGF, a very, very important firm doing these things. Most of their work is a lot more heroic and larger, but they definitely dabble in and do really good examples of things.
Yeah, that was one of the challenges, like trying to find case studies that we could relate to in like site, as well as with like older people.
Yep. Yep.
So I found a bunch of different ones, but again, some of them were they were completely out of our scope. So hopefully
right.
We'll go through those.
So one of the things I've been talking with Carmen and Courtney about tonight, and I think you all heard me sort of doing this, but thinking about what you're doing as a research document, or you're feeding, right? You're feeding the other team members, right? So your work is kind of heavy on case studies. So I think maybe the library has this, but there is a book called Low Rise Mixed Use. It's A&T, like Artist and Thomas, 32, volume 2.
Mm-hmm.
This is a publication that I think our library has. And then there's Residential Mixed Use, A&T, it's number 33/34. So these are like slick, croquis type publications that you can look at, maybe even buy. LOHA, LOHA, has an interesting publication on this issue called Amplified Urbanism. And then there's this book, I don't know if you all can see it, but it's on Barcelona housing, social housing in urban context. It's very small. It's only a few pages. It's not very expensive. You might be able to buy a copy, and Rasha, you can borrow it and share it with Andrew. I'm looking at the receipt to see how much I might have paid for it. I don't think I paid $20 for it. But in any event, these are sort of examples that you can look to. And then just so you know how I feel about this, I think it's really important for you to look at Stephen Holl, Holl, and you need to look at his so-called hybrid building in Seaside, Florida. This came out in like 1980, and this was really one of the very first iterations of modern contemporary mixed uses, where there were artist lofts and roofscape for the artists and residents there, with office space, with a grocery store on the ground floor. It was a small building in footprint. It was tall in height, but it was only 3 stories plus the roof. This is an important building in his career because it set into motion many other things, and he's arguably one of the most important architects in the country, if not the world. And it became kind of a template for a lot of the work that was created by these other architects that I just cited for you. But my point is that you kind of have this obligation, I think, to the team members and to yourselves to paint a picture of the work that's been done. What is the example of best practices by the architects in not just the name brand architects, but all of the architects. There are local examples, and there are internationally acclaimed examples. There are excellent architects in Barcelona that are doing it, and then there are architects that did it, like Stephen Holl, 40 years ago, and have done a whole bunch of other things since then. But the two people I think, that have been doing it for really, really, really well for their whole career. So much so that Mr. Cox at the City of Detroit thinks that they're the best architects in the country. So my high regard for them is shared by him, for example, is Julie Eisenberg of Koning Eisenberg and David Baker. They're worth looking at.
Okay. Sounds good.
Does that help?
Yeah, it helps a lot. And I know, like you said, our research is heavily based on case studies. So
yeah, so I think it should be more heavily loaded in terms of acquainting us with what these things look like, and maybe maybe it's like a mosaic of several plates that just show a lot of them in images that are always the same size on each plate.
Mm-hmm.
Or, right? So maybe you do that, Andrew, and then Rasha, for example, takes a building, right? A case study from the mosaic that Andrew and you have created and kind of just like tears it apart, shows us what the site plan looks like, shows us what the floor plans look like, the sections, right? How is this thing knit together? How is it put together? What are the drawings that this architect used to, explain this, right? So a more sort of a deeper dive of one of the case studies. That could be an effective thing. So you give kind of the buckshot, here's what's going on, and here's what's been going on, and then here's one thing taken into a deeper sort of expose. Again, for the purpose that you're going to share and give ammunition to the other architects in our class.
Okay. Yeah. That works.
Cool. What else? Mixed use, volume 32. Residential mixed use, volume 33, 34. Amplified Urbanism by Loha. Export Barcelona. I have 3 of the 4 books at my house. I think, I don't know, I don't remember. I'm looking, but I don't see it. Maybe the one is at the office. But Andrew or Rasha, you're welcome to borrow them to sort of look at and review as long as you pledge to return them.
Yeah, that'd be great. If
So you could arrange to come and get them at the kind of floats your boat. Just let me know if that's what you fancy, okay?
Yeah, that would be great if we could. I could probably pick it up Thursday if you're available.
So yeah, just you know how to get a hold of me. So just let me know, okay, Rasha?
Okay, sounds good.
Bueno, I'll let you guys go unless there's anything else. Andrew?
Nope.
Okay, very cool. Thanks for your. Thanks, and Rasha, I'll talk to you soon then, maybe.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Eric and Joshua.
There you are. Hi.
How are you?
Good. So we sent you that stuff you saw earlier.
Can you remind me the stuff from Ash's exercise?
No, I had kind of put some stuff together in a Word document and just started to outline maybe what we were going to cover. And I think we were going about it the wrong way. We were trying to solve problems. And I'm thinking that maybe that's not the idea, the intent. We're not trying to solve the code issue for everybody. We're trying to provide them with the tools to solve it themselves, right?
I think at one moment, or let me just say this. I love this topic, teaching design, and I may love teaching history and theory, but I'm a total nerd. And so getting into the building codes is something I'm very amenable to. And I'm actually a resource in my office, despite the fact that I'm just the design director there, right? There's like better and more reliable people in my office to go to, but I'm no slouch, right, when it comes to this topic, because I love it. And I learned it the hard way by doing a very complicated mixed-use building in Royal Oak. And I think what I learned is that it is a chess game. It's not a checker game. It's a chess game. And every piece has role, and it has kind of territory that it can cover. And it actually has physical, like a knight moves a certain way, you know, 2 forward and 1 left or right, and that's it. It's all it can do. And the code is kind of like that. It's also kind of like TurboTax, right? If you've ever done that, where you plug in the data and it starts running, and then it prompts you with another thing, and you have to go to that, and then sometimes you have to circle back to look for more backup material, and then that whole, and you start to panic, and you know, and then it comes back up. It's kind of like that. And I love the journey that it takes us on. But the code is really important at a number of different levels. And I think one of the things I'm trying to get each of you guys to do, and I love that you're both together here, so this works out well, is to give the architects in our class the tools, right, to be able to realize that what they're designing actually overlays the code, that there is a code, and there are sections in the code that govern things like the number of egress components that it can have, the fact that an elevator can't be relied on for egress save for the fire marshal and the firemen, the fact that there are travel distances that occur, and how does one go about like graphically representing travel distance throughout the building. How does one measure the travel distance within a residential unit? You know, that 125-foot dimension. That's just one thing. How do you diagram horizontal separations, and what are the requirements for that? I'll share with you a diagram that we've prepared in our office, for example, to help clients understand how you can do stick-built, whether wood or metal, right, over retail. And so what's in that podium, and how high can you go based on the current code, right? The Michigan Building Code. So talking about the sectional sort of DNA of one of these mixed-use buildings, in terms of like the way that an architect can like look at this stuff that you're producing, and giving them the tools to know that what they're doing, what they're creating, can be found in the code, or at least talked about in the code. And that's just like separation, that's travel distance. Then there's kind of, then there's the whole, and egress and life safety, but then there's all of that stuff that has to do with like chapter accessibility, which, you know, type A units, type B units, and talking a little bit about that, because as you know, or as you may know, or as you will learn, that like in apartment buildings, you have to have like 2%, no fewer than 2 apartments that are full barrier-free, you know, bells and whistles, grab bars, 6-foot radii, you know what I mean? 3-foot door leaves, knock away partitions at the sinks, and all of that stuff. That's the number that you have to have. So there's a way that you can do this that is better than a title sheet on a project, and it's that's comprehensive and maybe graphical. That maybe if you've ever looked at like one of those old, you guys are too young to remember Frank Ching, but this was a guy that wrote like architectural graphics, building construction illustrated, and it was like beautiful because all of his stuff was hand lettered like this, you know, and the drawings like axonometric. So he did all these books, right? He has a legacy of these books, but he's actually done books that talk about to interpret the building code. You guys are in offices. You've seen the commentary of the building code, maybe, right? There's the building code, and then there's the commentary, which is like usually 2 issues or additions to 1, because it like it restates the code, and then it gives you like the history of it, how they researched it, how they came up to like a common understanding of what was an acceptable travel distance, for example. And then there might be these drawings, right? There'd be these drawings that show the ICC's interpretation of the code. These drawings, and then there's a whole book like by Frank Ching, Building Codes Illustrated, that align with each edition. You could probably go to the library. There's probably one in your offices that you could probably like recast that material, right, in a graphical way, not in a kind of a dry, I'm going to fall asleep way, so that everyone has the information that they need, that we all need to design a 5-story building with residential over retail, over utility and accessory spaces, over parking, which is actually called storage. It's open parking, right? Because we're not going to, you know what I mean? We're not going to heat it or treat it unless that's what you want to do. But most people don't go that. I did, the parking deck I did in Royal Oak was 2 floors, and it was going to be open, but they decided to close it in. And that was a whole nother conversation in terms of ventilation and fresh air intake and all of that. But you know, that's part of the stuff. So what are all the things that are going to come into play vis-a-vis the code? Rooftop access, like how do you get through things and have assembly spaces up there like a community space that has a kitchen, right? What if I have black iron? What is that like running vertically through the space? What do I need to do for that? How do I compute stairs based on occupant load? Walk us through that equation. How do I measure travel distance? How do I understand separation between residential and residential and retail, and all of that over storage / parking? Break it all out. Give us the roadmap, right? That helps us literally design a building so that we know that it is sensible, so that we know that it's not a fire trap or a death trap, so that we know that it works, because that's really the prerogative of the studio. And I'm just kind of looking at, yeah, I mean, those were the sort of themes that I thought were relevant. I'm open to hearing the things that you're aware of working in offices that I might have overlooked or forgotten about, and so we can certainly add those. But that's kind of my hunch that that's what you were talking about.
As this has been going on, you've been talking to other students. Eric and I have been putting something together.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see you both.
I'll get you closer to kind of what we've got so far. You probably can't read it, but
I can't even. I can see the white sheet. It looks like it's ready to be drawn on.
Right. Exactly. It's already been drawn on. You can't even tell. So we want to start with talking about occupancy and use group. Move on to building heights and areas. You know, we're going to define that. We're going to list the groups and establish what possibilities exist for these different types of spaces so that you can make a decision about what you're doing. Then move forward. We're also going to discuss accessory and incidental use and kind of give them an idea of what it is. Then we'll move forward to building heights and areas and how that's defined by those occupancies and use groups.
Yeah.
In that heading, we're going to discuss separation of occupancies, provide some graphics. What else here?
You know, I didn't even talk about that stuff. So I appreciate that. Yeah. So definitely, you have to show somebody how to calculate an occupant load.
Right.
Occupant load is based on occupancy. Those are two different words. They don't mean the same thing. I'm sloppy that way. I will use them both, and people don't know what I mean. But you should maybe say occupant load and use.
Yep.
Right, that's more precise. So show us how to calculate the occupant load of a retail space, right? And then that gets a little fuzzy, doesn't it? Yep. Right, because like retail space, community space that the whole community of users can use for like a meeting, or so it's like more like assembly, like A3, or is it a restaurant, or or is it a Hallmark store or a cake shop? Like, so retail, 2 spaces at like 2,500 each, for example, can trigger 2 or 3 different loads. Your teammates need to understand that. The residential occupant load, based on an R residential occupancy or use group, is going to be a lot lower, and it's not going to have that many variables. So I think you need to teach us how to create the occupant load for those spaces. Same with storage, which is the garage. And then for me, and maybe you can and improve my memory on this, but like incidental spaces might be like the loading dock, a trash room, right, that have ultimately a very high denominator so that you produce a low occupant load, right? But these things need to be taken account of. You don't necessarily take the occupant load of a corridor or an elevator or a stairway, right? But that's all part of the building area, because those are not always occupied. They don't perform in the same way that like the trash room does or a commercial space does. So you need to teach us that as well. As we get into that, there's some finer details in occupant load that you need to talk a little bit about, given that we're doing a windowless story, right, for the basement, a ground floor, and the upper floors you're going to have stair convergence, right, where the basement occupant loads are meeting in the first floor, and that triggers the calculation for door openings and the widths of stairways. I have found that in these mixed-use buildings with 50 people or fewer, that a 4-foot stairway, right, between the handrails on both sides, that's going to be enough for an occupant load like this. All of the first floor spaces discharge to the public way anyway, so you're only converging a small occupant load from the basement and the heavier occupant load from the residential floors above. But you need to have that diagram that you can find in the commentary about convergence. That's an important thing. These are all things to like go through, right, as we're getting into the building design. And then I think you brought up the point that I overlooked, which is construction type. Goes back to the first floor as a non-combustible chassis or podium, and then stick built above, which I presume is the case, but it doesn't have to be that. But if it is wood or if it is stick built, then that's going to trigger a specific construction type, right? And you want to teach us about that. And as one look at that matrix in, what is that, 605 in the code that talks about construction types, you want to teach us how to, as a designer, how we pick the one we pick. Right? So I think that's that early tutorial that happens in the early graphics that you do. And then I think you get into the more detailed things like, travel distance, accessibility, and that sort of stuff. But yeah, y'all are spot on. You got to give us occupant load, use group, how to calculate occupant load as a combination, and then how you assign a value for the construction type. Big stuff.
Okay. Anything else?
I think that's about it. I just feel a lot better. That
Let's see.
Right back finally.
Yeah. We've kind of been spinning our wheels for a week trying to think about how do you approach this? How do you spell it out, and
how do you portray it?
Right.
So
without
try to resist writing anything. Try to resist using as many words as possible. Try to use as few words as possible. Right? Like ever fly anywhere and get a hotel room, and you go out the door in the morning and there's the USA, you heard of that newspaper? Have you ever seen that newspaper, right? It's like loaded with like graphics and maps and pie charts and diagrams. These are really useful examples to us as architects for how to take data, take information, and recast the facts, the contents, to understand it in a formal way, in a form-based way, right? That's what architects are, right? We're kind of like not so interested in words, we're interested in images, right? So how do you do that? How do you diagram occupant load, right? So you, like, 3 people on a diagram, 3 silhouettes of people standing there equals 300. Get it? Right? Elevator as a means of egress with a Get it? Right? You know what I'm saying? You know, like you don't use the elevator for egress. So like thinking about infographics. If you look that word up on Google and start to like look at images for information graphics or infographics, you'll go, holy crap, it's like amazing what you can portray graphically that is highly factual or highly informative. Your stuff is, and this is where I'm circling back to where I started, your stuff is boring, banal, dull, dry. It's really, really critically important. And my goal is not stuff we need to know to design these complex buildings, but here's the gig, right? Maybe someone who is intimidated by this subject matter and didn't choose it because, you know, you guys took it so quickly because you're really good at it. Maybe someone here wants to know this and has no idea where to start. And so here's an opportunity for you to teach us what you guys know as, you know, erstwhile experts on this topic, which is probably why you took it, because you're interested in it, or you're good at it, or you're relied on in your offices to do this stuff, so that you might actually get somebody who feels like they're totally incapable of knowing this to actually become like you, an expert, or someone like you who's interested in it. And I can't think of anything better than igniting someone in our class in a subject matter that they didn't know much about. So that's pretty cool. And that's kind of like I said earlier last week, like you guys are going to be teaching us. So that's what I'm trying to get you to do, is find a way to teach us about what you know. Actually, one of the hardest things about teaching is that you learn so much about what you have to teach. And that's the hard part. You're uncovering it because you start, how do I get this information across so that it's legible, it's interesting, it's informative. And I think if you think of think of like the Frank Ching building code illustrated, if you think about the commentary that you have in your office on the ICC and use that as a stepping stone, you'll create something that's maybe really, really provocative. What other code sections? So there's a whole section on mixed-use buildings.
Couldn't find that.
There's,
you know,
yeah, it's in the early chapters, right? It talks about retail. It talks about business, right? It talks about assembly, talks about residential. There's also unlimited area, and there's also mixed use, right? I think the other code thing is that you need to talk about and make sure that we take stock of, because in a way you're kind of creating a checklist, right? I told you I was a nerd. You have to make sure that we all appreciate that these facilities have to be fully suppressed, right? They have to be sprinklered because people are sleeping. And when you're sleeping in these higher density buildings and the fire alarm goes off, right? They're to get everybody out, and people are completely disoriented, and sprinklers and alarms and sprinklers are part of the requirement of these buildings. And when you get into high-rise construction, have you guys ever done that?
No.
That's a different set of requirements for the alarming and notification system. There's a whole section on that. And there's a requirement for what they call an FCC, a Fire Command Center, There's a room right off the front entrance of the building that is just for, you know, Fred the fireman. And they, you know, she or he sets up shop in that fire command center to monitor and do diagnostics on all of the systems, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and the cameras are all in there. I mean, so a high-rise building, which is anything over 6 and 7 stories, right, has to have these. But our buildings will have to be sprinklered, and so you need to make sure that, you know, you're comprehensive to
Uh-oh.
doing. Are y'all still there?
No, we lost you there. About 30 seconds ago, we lost you.
Okay, I just asked if you all were still there. If I had put you to sleep.
No, we just couldn't hear anything.
Cool. So, you know, you could approach this as a couple of plates, and spread the tasks out, but ultimately look at what you're doing as not two separate things, but as one package that builds the intelligence so that someone like Wu or Paige or me or Andrew can design a building, you know, that enjoys the sort of code expertise that you both possess, right?
When we talk about these residential units and they're type A, they're type B, we don't have to go into such detail like you need to have a handrail at this height in the bathroom, and then there's another one on the back.
No, because you know what,
right?
You know what, Josh, we're not gonna be, we're not gonna wait. I'm gonna wait. Okay. So you're back. I'm not gonna make you design the interiors of all of these units. I'm not gonna make you draw kitchen elevations. I mean, unless you want to, or toilet elevations. But I think they need to appreciate that an A unit exists in the code and a B unit does, and there's differences in them, and that there are different spreads of them in these buildings. There's a certain number of A's and the rest of them are B's, and there are no C's. It's either A's or a lot of B's, and that they come with these expectations. But I don't expect, for example, that you're going to delineate all of them for this research exercise, or that in the studio you'll delineate them in your final design.
Right.
All right.
Okay. So just to wrap it up, I guess, we're doing this from the lens of we're providing a pitch to a client. You know, we're not going to go and design everything. You know,
you know, that's actually an interesting angle.
We're selling this idea to somebody. We don't need to go into such depth that we know exactly everything about it. We're just trying to, you know, get somebody on board with this concept and for them to buy the building.
Well, so I'm a little, so I like a little bit about what you're saying. I'm a little uncomfortable with it as a sales thing. Here's maybe the way I might rework that. Let's say let's say I come to you both, I come to you and your classmates. I've got a pile of money. I'm going to give it to you to design the building I think I want on the site that I own, right? And I say, I want a lot of residential units, and I'd love a restaurant downstairs, and we should do some parking, and I'm prepared to pay for underground parking. And you say, okay, great. Here's our contract, and I sign the contract, and you get going. So one of the things that you provide as architects value in this process of designing a building is educating the client, right, on the design parameters vis-a-vis the building code, vis-a-vis the ADA code, right, vis-a-vis the plumbing code and the electrical code, right? You're always updating the client along the way so they make rational decisions based on accurate information, not, you know, wonky decisions that are totally irrational. So, and this happens throughout all of the process. But that like first conversation that you lead, that both you and Eric lead, is a conversation that says, okay, Mark, one of the many things that you need to understand about doing a mixed-use building in 5 stories is that that we have to do this according to the code, right? And we have liability as architects to deliver a code-compliant building. And our documents, something else you talk about, our documents, our construction documents, not only go to the bank for loans and but they go into the city for permitting, or they go to ICC because the city's too busy to review them. So they go to ICC for permitting, and they review, and they're going to find things that we've inadvertently missed, or that they've taken issue with our interpretation of the code. And so we need to design a building according to the code. And here's what the code is. Here's what it governs. Here's why it's important. And these are the major touchstones, right? And we just talked about this, that we have to design to in order to design a competent mixed-use building. And now we're going to pour you a fresh cup of coffee, and here we're going to walk you through them. And that's what you're doing.
Got it.
That's sort of how I feel that you're doing.
Right.
Because like a client has no choice but to buy what you're selling. So I think it's important that you understand that that there's no, it's not negotiable, is right. And then since you guys work in offices, one thing that becomes interesting is that the code is clear cut and black and white, but it's actually open for interpretation. An example of that might be in the restaurant where on that ground floor space, where we've got, like, let's say 2,500 square feet. And because of the unique maybe menu or business plan of the restaurateur, right, they know that they won't have the number of occupants ever in the joint that your occupant load calculation says you're going to have. So the code actually has language in it, right, that allows one, like the restaurateur, to write a letter of affidavit that says we will never have more than 38 people in this 2,500 square foot restaurant space, signed Eric and Joshua, and then that goes into the file, right, for that project. You know what I'm saying? So the code anticipates interpretation. The code anticipates some variation and interpretation, and there's processes for that.
Right.
I don't know how you're going to talk about that. That may be part of your verbal presentation, but the code is a wonderful thing, and I'm an advocate for it. I love the code, and I'm definitely excited that you guys are taking it on, and that you wanted to take it on so early. But it's your goal, I think, is to bring others in the studio up to the level of expertise that you'll be at when you're done with this exercise.
Okay.
Cool.
No, I think we're good for now.
We're good now. Yep.
Glad to see you both in the same room. Does this work out well for you guys?
Works out great.
Yeah. Yeah, really good.
Okay. Awesome. Well, stick around. I think Ash comes in at 9 or so tonight, so he'll run his session from this hangout. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, guys. We'll talk soon. Let's see. Hey, Lynn, are you here?
Hi, Mark. I'm here.
Let's see. I'm trying to find your icon. Nancy, there's Lynn. Okay, there you are. How are you? Do you want to go tonight? You wanted to initially.
I had initially. We can speak tonight if you'd like. I am sort of on a roll with sort of just going through a lot of the documents myself. I guess these first few days I've sort of been just trying to gather all the information that's associated with my topic.
Yeah, it's like drinking water from a fire hose. Lynn, what category are you looking at?
So I'm looking at topic number 2, which is the Future City Framework, zoning ordinance, and
so
the 139.
Let me tell you a couple of things. First of all, the Detroit Future City Framework was incubated. It was conceived, incubated, and delivered in my office.
Okay.
But I was not there when that all happened. I arrived only 3.5 years ago, but the team that did it, and a lot of the team that did it actually ain't there any longer either. And that's an interesting story as well. And it's a good one, actually. But it actually emerges from the office of Hamilton Anderson. It was a big effort, but it actually had a studio in Hamilton Anderson's office. And that's my office. That's where.
Mm-hmm. And that was something that you were approached where there was an RFP for Hamilton Anderson to prepare a document of this nature and inform sort of decisions for the city to take forth?
Exactly.
Okay.
So one of the team members actually left our office, a partner, and he became the executive director of the Detroit Future City offices. Another one left our office at around the same time and became the director of architecture at Bedrock, who, in their infinite wisdom and business plan, created the vacant land guide and the blight book, right? Because Bedrock is also Quicken Loans, which has to do with mortgages, right? So it was in their interest to help homeowners understand what to do with what maybe sits next door to them as a vacant land, and how they could maybe buy that and approach it as an improved property, and so on. So many of the team members that led the Detroit Future City Framework emerged from our office to lead the Detroit Future City forward, but it all happened in our office. That's the first thing. And so when you go to the website for the Detroit Future City, you can download the whole book.
Okay,
you can download the whole PDF.
Is that the one that's like 700 and something pages?
Yes.
Or? Okay.
Yes.
I have downloaded that.
So
and
download
I've
the PDF.
to go through it.
And for example, in our
sorry, you
area.
had a cutout there, Mark. I didn't catch what you had said after download the PDF.
What I was saying is that after you have that, you can peruse it and understand its organization, and then start to dial in on what is anticipated in this future vision of the city for Brush Park.
Okay.
That's the one thing. Then, just Wednesday last week, before class started, the Detroit Future City released the DFC 139 square miles, which is a multi-page presentation that you should look at too. You should download that and read that.
Yeah, I have it. It's downloaded in my folder for all the reading that needs to be done.
Good. Okay. So right there you have in DetroitFutureCity.org, you have 2 primary research resources to look at, and I think that would be helpful. Then,
those I have.
Lynn, there's the zoning ordinance, which is more complicated.
Yes.
And I'm not a planner, so I'm not going to be much assistance on that. But like, I've been saying tonight, and perhaps you've been hearing me, I've been saying tonight that I'm expecting in this is that you will become an expert in this topic in number 2, right? You're going to be the go-to for this. But your obligation, right, as a team member in our little office, our virtual office, our classroom, is to bring all of your other classmates in these other groups up to speed on how much you know, right? So your obligation is to share and disseminate and teach us about the sort of precepts of the DFC 139 and the Detroit Future City Framework as it relates to our parcel, but also as an architect talking to other architects in our little office, how does an architect go about designing a building that, you know, conforms to the code? What is it about setbacks? What is it about building height? What is it about open space requirements? What is it about parking for retail? What is it about parking for residential? How is that computed? What happens when you're within a quarter of a mile of a transit how does that and how does that impact the parking requirement? And so on, right? So there's a lot to be found in the you need to recast in a graphical, textual way that informs all of your classmates.
Okay.
So,
and as this
you
is
know,
all
in
very
simple
new to
terms,
me.
you probably have been, you work in an office, right?
Yep.
Or on this parcel at Spadina, right? And whatever. I'm trying to impress.
Yeah.
What's the zoning report for that parcel? So that's what you're being asked to do here for your classmates.
Yeah, and I guess what I've found, because looking into the zoning ordinance for Detroit, each city sort of has its own way of and sort of network of how they lay everything out. I just want to make sure that I'm using the proper websites and guides for this, and I think I found, is it chapter 61?
So I'm going to trust you on this. Keep talking.
Is sort of where I had started my research on this topic. I'm not sort of all the way through it, and I don't have all the answers.
So I will
yet.
validate that for you. I believe that's correct.
Okay. So further digging in that should give me a lot of these answers, and I have found the maps and the zoning code, but I need to yet find the specifics as they relate to our site, and that's sort of where I am at this moment in my research, is finding those details, which I'm hoping to get to, and I think.
Did the program and site information that I gave you, did the site drawings that I gave you have anything in that about the, you know, those diagrams at the back? Yeah, so Lynn, if you look at page 2 of the diagrams in the site and building program document.
Oh, you have some of it here.
Right, some of that language is coming from that ordinance. So maybe look at what I shared with you guys and see how that aligns with chapter 61 or whatever you're looking at. And then there is, just so you know, a Brush Park urban renewal plan.
Yes.
Right, and that's also in the document I handed out.
It's in this building and site.
Yeah, the purple text thing that I did. It's mentioned in that, right?
Yes. So that was another piece
so
of
that's
the puzzle.
that's a starting point, and then So is the next that I gave you. It can be, maybe should be part of your effort. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the only other document that I've been referencing, I guess, was the current master plan for the city, and I am seeing some overlap between those narratives and that in the future city framework. I'm sure they've been correlated, but that was another piece that I had sort of been reading through, and those were, I guess, sort of the four larger topics, each of which needs to be detailed.
That sounds about right. Again, I'm no planner, but I think what you're looking at is correct. I will say that it's going to be murky. We're kind of a draconian community here. It's an old city, and quite honestly, the future city framework was like the Messiah that arrived. It was incredibly important. Its timing was important relative to the whole needle move of the city in terms of new development. So what I would do is I would get into the weeds of the ordinance and the urban renewal plan and learn about it and talk about it and portray it in your research plates, Lynn. But I would also say that where there are contradictions or frustrations, moments of frustrations in your research, then go to the Detroit Future City Framework and use that as the sort of overlay. Understand that as the overlay for what the city is expecting to play out in the future. Because current zoning doesn't really like accommodate what we're proposing in Brush Park in our class. So the overlay does. So it's that kind of conundrum that plays out.
Okay. Yeah, so the framework would, I suppose, take precedent to what the current ordinance calls, and we would assume that we would achieve the zoning.
It's frustrating, right? Because it's not adapted, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a framework. And so the city's trying to like put the ordinance back together in a way that aligns with the overlay. So it's in this, the ordinance is in this transitional sort of mode.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, it will happen.
Okay.
And here's the thing. I know that a 5 or a 6-story building can go in Brush Park because we're building 2 of them right now. So we got it through based on that. And I'll share anything that I have at the office that I can put my hands on that will help you be as accurate and clear in your resources. I'm just not remembering it all tonight off the top of my head.
Yeah, anything that you can share would certainly be very helpful.
Cool, I'll do that. Maybe remind me in an email tomorrow during the day. Maybe before you get too busy with anything, like when you're getting your coffee, either email me or text me so that I don't take you away from what you're doing.
I'll send it in the morning before I get wound up in other things.
Exactly. Can you tell me about the office you're working in?
Yes, I'm with HOK Architects in Ottawa.
That's right, you told me that.
Yeah, so I'm there as a technician. I've been there for about 3.5 years. Ottawa being a government city, we work largely doing fit up and new builds for various federal departments and agencies. We deal with a lot of high security buildings, commercial fit up.
How interesting. So this kind of project, this mixed use project is kind of chunkier and simpler than the more complex buildings that you're working on currently there, but they're not too dissimilar.
No, it's
we're working with you guys.
Oh, I think you had mentioned on the arena. Yeah, that's
on the Little Caesars.
That's a very special group of that's part of HOK.
City office, right? That's the arena. That's the original Helmuth Obata Kasbam group. They were there in St. Louis and in Kansas City, and they specialize in these really crazy arenas.
yeah, HOK has a lot of interesting arms and facets, much of which are sort of beyond, I guess, my knowledge on the day-to-day of what I do for the practice. But
Great.
certainly a wealth of
So-
knowledge and opportunities.
Well, I'm glad, and you've been there for 3 years, so that's a really good sign. I'm glad for you. That's an excellent firm. We actually have one of our design professionals. That's what we have to call them now. We can't call them interns any longer. NCARB told me that. So one of my design professionals, who's finished all of his exams, he's just hitting the last 20 hours in programming right now. He came to us from HOK. So from the Dallas office, or from the Kansas City office. So it's really fun to work with Christoph. You will be taking critical practice next summer of 18.
Yes.
So you'll have to be in town for that.
Yes.
So when that happens, that's when I'll make sure that we have a chance to meet.
Yes, absolutely. I love that.
Okay, good. All right, so on that, and then I will hope you can remember to nudge me on the background stuff for what sections of the ordinance to look at, and then I'll share that with you if I can get my hands on it. Okay?
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, and I'll talk soon then. Thanks for meeting tonight. That takes some burden off of Thursday night. And then Ash, I'm going to email Ash right now. We're done for tonight, and that you all are waiting for him to get here. Okay? And I'm going to leave this channel open for you guys to do that. Students are ready for you. Join the hangout. Okay, I sent that off to him. He should be here shortly. I'm going to go get an adult beverage and then come back and audit the session. I'm going to make sure I invite him again. Okay, I'll be back in a few moments.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Is Mark done?
Hi, Ash.
Yeah.
He went to go get a drink, but he is done.
Hi, Carmen.
Hi.
Okay, so let's take some questions. That's today is simply a follow up of the assignment. So I'm ready to take any questions from any group. I understand. I sent some people some resources. Nobody wants to step up. Hey, Mark.
So I'm going to text him.
I'm here.
Oh, he's here? Good. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Do I have to,
once I received your...
how do I give you... Yeah, good. So Ash, how do you want to do this? I mean, I can leave this sort of hangout open, you, because everybody's invited and everybody's here, and then you can just like hold the microphone and run your class the way you see fit, and I'll close it at the end. Does that make sense for you?
Sure. Since I think you are the author of this page, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's how it has to be. Okay, so I
won't take too long, Mark. I'm just telling them that I'm just going to respond to their questions. Today is just a follow-up to the research phase assignment.
Brilliant. So
I did send.
So I'm just going to sit back and learn from you guys.
I did send some resources simply for people on sustainability codes and innovations in envelope or building enclosure. So I'm just waiting for any questions. I believe Josh had some questions regarding the code, as well as many others who would like to ask questions. Just one thing to add here, that this portion of this will represent a portion of the grade of the lab as well. So we'll share probably again in grading this stage. So the people who will have this technical research simply inform or pave the way to others, so they will learn from each other. So site people, aging group people, they will inform the technology people with what they're finding. So it's like a collaboration. It's not like, oh yeah, this is mine, this is yours, oh I don't care about it. No, this is, you will be asked, like for people who are in technology, sustainability, structure, enclosure, you will have to do this stuff as it apply to your project. So in addition to whatever 20 like 20 by 20 sheets, or 11 by 17 or 24 by 36, what format are you require them to have, Mark? Format, final format? Mark?
Right. So first of all, I would say that the 1117 format works really well for this class because it's an online format.
Sure.
So and Courtney and the team have already laid out an InDesign template, and they're sharing that.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, it's very nice.
So that's super. The second thing is, I'm so glad you said that when you were talking about grading and the sort of more technical components, that because one of the things you said was that they're going to be shared. And I've spoken tonight with half of the class, and I'll speak again with the other half on Thursday night. But the thing I've tried to repeat is that you may have chosen the building codes or the zoning ordinance or baby boomers as a theme because it's something that aligns with your own prerogatives or interests, right? You may be really good at it, for example, and that's great. But your job, your obligation is to teach us all with as much intelligence and clarity and legibility as you can about what you know in this and through your research with everyone else, so that everyone else becomes as much an expert on the building code or sustainability as she is or he is, so that we all come up together to the same level of sort of informativeness.
One more thing that I talked to them the time that I met them on last Tuesday, is you could, if you're really pushing sustainability within your project, and this should be in the project in a way or another by achieving some lead points, by following even more stricter code in the enclosure, increase insulation. If you are using, for example, Michigan is using now ASHRAE 90.1 2007 edition or version for commercial, and 2015 IECC code for residential, International Energy Conservation Code for residential. So if you for some reason exceed that, so you are going into high performance building, ASHRAE 189.1. So if you want to pursue to go to a competition, AIA code, Committee on the Environment, COTE, I told them that the deadline is, I believe, late December, early January.
Right.
And Dan Farrow is our AIA point of contact at the college. So for whoever of you, please feel that, oh, you know, I came up with a very good project that I think it's, you know, it does have many features to conserve the environment, a tighter envelope, you know, many least credit. This is why the lead portion of the research should be included in within sustainability. That's I think page responsibility here.
Good.
So if you feel that your project, you have done a very good job and you considered a lot of features, please apply and we'll let you in. It doesn't need any extra work. Just this project, we'll just submit it for, and the technicals too. If you have a nice sheet or two on sustainability, or recent innovations, really innovative building enclosure, you can include it within your project. So that's the whole package.
Sure.
And you cost is nothing. That's a digital. But I'll get back to you on the format. On the format. I'm not sure if it's 11 by 17 or 20 by 20 mark. So
if so, maybe can you share, Ash? Can you share that email from Dan Farrow about the AIA code competition? Maybe they can review it and evaluate whether they want to jump in and go for it. But it is, you're right, it's a low-hanging fruit, no fee. The work we're going to be doing this year satisfies, if not is superior to the requirements of the competition, and it happens after the semester is over, so you can go back and reformat some of the product if you need to fit the 20 by 20 requirement, if that is a requirement. So it's like it's like this is easy pickings.
Yeah, I think Mark, that as most of your studio outcomes, this will be great. If they can, again, COTE or COTE is again Committee on the Environment. So you have to prove to the jurors,
not too much, I don't think,
or to the jury that your project, your design contains some of the features, sustainability features, or high performance energy conservation. I think that's an easy task. It's within your project. I used to do that. In my construction systems class, we had a drawings competition. We have specs by CSI. CSI gives us like $3,000 every year to write a part of the spec. So LTU has a long history with CSI, so we had it as an assignment. So students submit their. It's not a full. It's full spec for roofing and glazing. It's not like a full spec for the whole building.
Full manual, right? Just a couple of sections.
Micro. But they have to write table of contents, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And
awesome.
Roof membrane and roof insulation and glazing. Since this was also taken by interior design measures, we are adding acoustical ceiling so that we train them. That's a part of CETA accreditation for interior measure or interior design program at LTU. So we're using this, and we're using the money. So they just submit if they feel that they did very well, they worked their butts off in this assignment. They take another copy of the assignment and sign off the entry form, okay, adhering by, if they don't claim their prize, like if they got $1,000, if they don't claim it the next fall, it will be forfeited, this kind of stuff. This is the entry form. I don't think AIA we'll see. So this is the same like what I used to do, and for CSI competitions, you just use your classwork at the end and submit it to AIA Code or Cote. I think that's a great chance for you. That's a good marketing tool. Usually when the results after the jury gives its final recommendations for the results, usually you have your name on it they recognize you as well as your instructors for this work. Simply Mark's name comes first and mine comes second. So that's a great chance for you guys if you feel that you did a very wonderful job with sustainability portion. Okay, high performance. Why not? You're not paying for this.
Yeah, I love the idea.
You're not working under a budget. Okay, so you're not paying for this. You just go for it.
Right.
That's
yeah,
my.
I think I'm definitely excited by it, and I'm encouraged that you're advocating it, because I can't think of any better way to sort of launch your sort of robust and maturing architectural career as a would-be graduate student than with this competition under your belt. It'll give you a lot of confidence. It'll give you some notoriety, and it's also good for the school, which is another benefit. But
that's
to have that on your resume is a real. It's a real sort of
on every front. On every front. So please consider this. Please, again, it's free. To your point, Mark, I haven't got any email, official email from Dan, but we just announced it. So I'm just want to be fair here, giving the chance to the other section of comp design, so they are equal.
Okay, sure. Okay, so if we get something, we'll share it with the students, and I
will. I promise. If he has something.
And as the semester evolves, maybe someone's a little reluctant or hesitant at this moment, sitting here tonight, in entering the competition. But maybe in a week or two, as we get into it, or 3 weeks, we say, you really ought to think about this competition, and to give them some encouragement so that they start targeting it. So I'm definitely in support of that.
I'll just come back to you guys on the format. I think it's 20 by 20. It's just all digital. You just put it in Illustrator or whatever program that you guys are using, SketchUp. Just put the ruler and just insert what you have. And I don't think our architectural drawings would make wouldn't be that hard to rearrange it in a 20 by 20 from 11 by 17. So, and again, it's all digital, no printing cost, nothing, no entry cost, but we have to register you. Okay. Then as I think he, I don't know if this is like by an access code or whatever. You cannot register by yourself. You have to tell us your interest, Ash or Mark. I want to submit for code. Again, the deadline, I think it's early January, late December, early January, after all this is done. So, like for example, Dan has a couple projects really standing out from his spring studio. This could, because it's 2017, so it's still within 2017. So I think 2 of the previous students are entering this competition. That was building Detroit, I think. Tom Nashlin's previous project, the Detroit River, Friends of Detroit River or whatever. So we are entering. It's the nature itself is, kind of a sustainable building, built by the river on a park. So that's something to consider. Again, I'm ready for questions, and I'm reiterating that yes, some people are working on the more technical topics in the research phase more than others in site. So as Mark said, everybody has to be an expert on the others. So the others are informing us on what to do, and I'm expecting from everybody, as long as you have, you work on sustainability, yes, but you are required to do a site analysis in your final project, how you came up with your layout or floor plan shape, what drove it, or if you have if you're following a certain axis for vision or any major design influence that you have. So I would expect people as well to put some sort of sustainability measures. Many guys, there are many lead points, envelope, recyclable materials. If you're using, I'm not sure if this, I don't know where this fall within who, but people who will take either sustainability or enclosure should look at HVAC systems, okay, sustainable HVAC systems for Detroit, okay. What makes the most, we are not asking you to design for us the system, okay. I'm not, this is why we don't require, of course, we don't require anything like that. Nothing on it is a requirement, but you are more than welcome. People who are working again on sustainability or envelope, a building enclosure, are welcome to add this to their criteria. I'm gonna consider it a big bonus for you. I don't have the, here we go, the sheet is here. I have here Alex and Wu for building enclosure innovations, and Paige Chorkey for sustainability. So I would love to have something on HVAC systems, sustainable HVAC system, or high efficiency HVAC systems. If you want to consider high performance buildings, these are, I would say, LEED Silver or above, because they save more than 20% or 30% of an energy of any regular building, following ASHRAE 90.1. So that's another thing to consider. I'm gonna just I told them, Mark, to just impress me on the submission. The wow factor. No, this English proverb, no second chance makes good first impression. So first impression is very important in the design field. So this wow factor will play a role even with 20% of the grade or so, or 15, whatever we're gonna decide later, how much this constitutes the research phase from the final grade.
Excellent.
So I'm ready for questions.
Ash, this is Lynn speaking.
Hi, Lynn.
From a sustainability perspective, have you ever looked into the WELL building standard that works sort of in conjunction with LEED, or is that something like I guess a different sustainability strategy that we could consider that may and may not work harmoniously with certain facets of LEED or Green Globes or any others on sort of which route we want to take and what our objectives are?
I know that you are in Canada, Lynn, but we we gotta go more towards LEED because it's
okay.
I know there is LEED for Canada and some other programs as well, but simply because we are in the United States, we have a USGBC students chapter here at LTU, so we like to go with LEED. So
okay, that's fine. It's just a new one that I'm learning about, and I didn't know if it translated over where you are at all.
So say that again. I probably missed the first sentence or so before the LEED. So you're looking for green building what? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it.
Sorry, the other system, I guess it's one that I'm learning about independently, is called WELL. WELL building standard, and its focus is primarily on like from a building user perspective, and has similar categories and works with it, but you prefer to see the LEED point strategy and breakdown.
I'd like to have more widespread measures. That even international countries now are implementing LEED. Not, of course, the recent version V4 has came up. So please, when you do investment,
I'm familiar. I am a LEED Green associate. Actually, I'm familiar with V4. So
or at least V3 of 2009, at least. So don't look at the very old measures to collect, the points per your design, or depends on your design. So. I would expect all of you to have a feature or two or three that pushes heavily towards sustainability. Many of these, when we go in depth to the studio, we'll have. I'll join more of discussions of the design, and we can push this through if I find that this is a really good scheme. To follow, or save energy, and can help you even model it. If you have a Revit model, we can simulate and prove that this is probably a net zero. These two kids who are entering the COTE or COTE competitions from Dan's last studio. Or he said they're not net zero. Net zero means the building produces what it consumes in terms of energy. I know this is challenging, very hard to prove, but we can even walk an extra mile for whoever of you guys wants to walk this extra mile. I can guide you to somebody whoever wants to do a simulation through a Revit. I know that for Mark, we kind of give not warning to our students in the on-ground version, but we said that please don't use Revit at the beginning. Use SketchUp or Rhino, because sometimes it hinders the creativity. But again, you're like my TA. He did some work for me. I was donating, like designing a church here, and I paid him, so it wasn't a donation from his side. It was my time. So I paid him nice couple $1,000 or $2,500, and he did some construction drawings for us, some 3Ds, and he did it with Revit and colored it.
Excellent. Ash, did I lose your video feed?
I think Ash froze. I can't see him anymore.
Yeah, I can't see him. Ash. I think his internet is a little wonky. Actually, I can still see all of you. I can see Rasha and Josh. So that's good. But Ash has evaporated. So, I mean, he's just bugged out. Maybe he's going to re-engage. I guess what I would say to you all is that I think he's anticipating to be here tonight, to be available for any questions. So if you have them, and if he comes back in, let's hit him with those questions. If not, if you have no questions, you can tell me that now, and I'll correspond with him. I'll text him or email him and say that that you all look forward to seeing him on Thursday evening, and then he can pick up at that point his session. Does that bode well for you guys?
That works for me. This is Carmen.
Anybody have any questions that they need to speak to Ash tonight about?
Lynn here. I don't have any questions for Ash tonight.
Okay, thanks, Courtney. Anyone else?
Andrew, I don't have any questions either.
Thank you, Andrew.
I'll have questions by Thursday, probably.
Okay, so I'm getting a sense that thanks, Carmen. Thanks, Rasha. Thanks, Luis. Thanks, Lynn. Okay, so I think the needle's moving to no questions. I'm going to release you, and if he wants to, if he says no, I wanted to go over something else, I'll let him start up another class session. So I'll close this tonight. Oh wait, he's just joined. I'm going to let him. I'm going to let him close.
Sorry.
There you are.
I'm so sorry.
You're back.
The Hangout just the Chrome just froze on me.
Okay. So I was just about to ask them if any of them had any further questions for you tonight, and several of them are saying no, not tonight, but I can email them if they do, certainly, or they can wait until Thursday night. Ash.
Sure. I'm fine with that.
Okay, cool. So I'll let you say goodnight, and then I'll close out the session, Ash.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good. Good night.
Thank
Have
you.
a good evening, everyone. See you all.
Thank you, Mark.
Good night, Ash.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.